So before you get into council-elect, where you deal with appointments and the typical council-elect agenda as stipulated in the policy on the council representatives and the executives, we're going to do just like a quick kind of CSU 101, get to know the organization you're now on the board of directors of, and sort of answer any questions you might have, as well as sort of prepare you with some community standards. There's also going to be a workshop on Robert's Rules, done by our, I guess, chair for 2018-2019, Caitlin, and we'll see who applies for 2019-2020. And then we're also going to do just a brief thing on fiduciary responsibility, because that's your duty as a director on the board of a nonprofit. So yeah, I guess we're going to start with just like CSU 101, and then we can go into Robert's Rules, and then when John gets back, we'll talk about fiduciary duty. I'll ask that if you have questions, write them down. I have made a PowerPoint that I will make available to you all digitally before May 31st. And what I handed out earlier was the Code of Conduct and Sexual Violence Policy waivers. Those are really important that you sign before May 31st, just so it's like on paper documented for your mandate. And we'll go over what that entails like a little bit more in depth in our presentation. So cool. Thanks. All right. What is the CSU? This is upside down. It is the largest representative body of all undergraduate students on campus. We represented around 36,000 people this year, so that's more than some borough mayors in Montreal. We also represent undergraduate students who are not enrolled in a program for a degree, so we represent independent students as much as we represent someone who's in a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Commerce or a Bachelor of Computer Science or any of the degrees that we offer at the undergraduate level. Our main offices are on the 7th floor of the Hall building. And does anyone know where the Loyola offices are?
On the Loyola campus! I don't know exactly where though, so I'm not gonna lie.
CC. I think that would be on the 4th floor of the CC building.
Correct.
Wow.
We have 4 services and a campaigns department. We have receptionists, we have researchers, we have a communications and graphic design team, we have a bunch of staff, and they're all unionized with CUPE. All of the employee positions at CSU are reserved for Concordia undergraduate students, with the exception of our general manager and accountant, who are chartered professional accountants, which means that they have more knowledge of how to audit finances than I do with my bachelor's in history and political science. Yeah, basically there's also a few exceptions because we have collaborations with the GSA for some of our services as well. The GSA doesn't provide as many services as we do, so sometimes they will pay us an amount to offer the services to graduate students as well. We also negotiate the health and dental plan for Canadian students, and we're currently working on the international student health plan.
Well, thank you very much.
It's expensive. It is too expensive. And those are decisions that are made at council that the executives then have to do. We are funded by the student union fee, which is a collection of fee levies that students pay per credit if they're undergraduate students. And I didn't finish doing the math, but the total is the sum of all those numbers on the board. We also have a daycare fee levy that goes to help subsidize the CSU daycare, which is super great. And a fun fact about our health plan, since I mentioned it, we have the same complimentary health insurance coverage as UDM, but managed to negotiate so well that our students pay over $200 less per year. I didn't negotiate that.
Definitely wasn't Omar.
No, it was the ones before Omar, actually.
Congrats to them.
Yeah.
Nearly ruined it.
So, anyway, these are the divisions of the student union fee. I wrote the total number here. You pay total $3.71 to the CSU, and it's divided like this per credit, which compared to the breakdown of tuition fees is a much more reasonable amount compared to how many more services you get from us for far less money than $54.22 per credit. Yeah. You can't opt out of the CSU fees either, because under the Accreditation Act, everyone who is represented by the CSU must pay into it, just like other unionized workplaces, except,
In Ontario.
yeah, well, RIP. Cool. Now we're talking about our services and departments.
Yes. Okay, so we have the main offices, which is where all the executives work, all our main office staff work. Then we have our services. So that's going to be HOJO, Housing and Job Bank. So they help students with housing and employment, and also issues that can come up around those things. And the LIC, Legal Information Clinic. It's not LIC, it's LIC.
They're like legal doctors.
So the LIC can give you legal information, not legal advice, because they will not represent you in court and they can't give you any advice on how to handle your case, but they can give you information on things like immigration, contracts, businesses, things along those lines.
Can I contest this ticket?
Yes, a lot of that. And it's run by, we have, all of these have a manager. There's one manager who is a member of the Quebec Bar, and then everyone else is a McGill law intern. The Advocacy Center helps students when they're charged under the Code of Conduct or,
The Code of Rights and Responsibilities.
yes,
Or the Academic Code of Conduct.
yes. Helps them kind of acts, yeah, like advocates. Like,
Basically,
advocate for you at that level.
if you go through the university student tribunal process, you can get yourself a CSU advocate to walk you through what even senior administrators call the bureaucratic molasses of the institution.
Or if you feel like you've been unfairly graded, they can help you through the steps of contesting your grade and so on and so forth.
If you have a late notation you need, they know how to apply and who to apply to. They're super cool. Do you know why we started the CSU Advocacy Center? Yes, yes.
Because the one that the school provides is not very helpful.
Sort of. So, back in 2000, oh, do you want to guess too?
I think it's because kind of like it's a conflict when it comes to this, the school only represents you up to a certain point when you're fighting against them. So it's like it's kind of like a conflict of interest for them to represent you and fight themselves at the same time.
That's definitely a reason that contributed to why we started it, but the actual material reason was in 2001 and 2002 there was a protest that broke the hall building window. And students who were involved in that protest were charged under the Academic Code of Conduct, and they were expelled without reason or due process, and the University Advocacy Center refused to represent them. So the CSU was like, actually, no. And then we created our own, and our training is really intense, and yeah, it's a really great service that we're really lucky to have. And it all started because the university was in a massive conflict of interest and tried to keep people expelled when they definitely shouldn't have been.
Right, we have clubs. The CSU has over 100 clubs.
Over 50?
Somewhere between 50 and 100. I heard 90 last. We have a lot of clubs. We have clubs practically every issue activity you could think of, and they're funded by this fee. And we have clubs coordinator as well as our internal coordinator. You want to talk about the SILK fund since you're on it? First of all, the acronym is pronounced SILK. You have to just not look at how the letters look.
Just people are going to say the Silk Fund, and you're going to be very confused.
You're
And
going to
then
say SILK.
SAIL? No, it's SILK, which stands for Student Space, Accessible Education, and Legal Contingency Fund. This is our big old fund that prevents us, so let's say, for example, a student representative who was duly elected to a seat on a university governing body was prevented from taking that seat,
Which could never happen.
would never happen, because under Article 32 of the Accreditation Act, the students are allowed to appoint whoever they want. However, let's say the university was not willing to budge on that. The Silk Fund could be used if we got into a lawsuit with the university over who is allowed to appoint who and to what bodies. The Silk Fund can also be used for student space initiatives. So recently we funded the renovations of the Cafe X space for FASA. We have funded, that's where our money for the daycare came from. Accessible education, it's also, so if there's a strike mandate for people to go on strike against tuition hikes, For example, the Silk Fund can be used to help fund those strike initiatives and make sure that people are, still able to like make ends meet and have a good time while being on strike.
Fun and safe on strike.
Yeah, it's also, that ties into stuff related to legal contingency. So for example, once again, Article 32 of the Accreditation Act, that relates to our accessibility of the institution. The university administration plays a real tough game of trying to find legal loopholes that don't exist, and this fund protects us and enforces us as a really strong advocacy body for our students. So it's super important. And there's one council seat on the Silk Fund. Yeah. Cool.
Should we see where this Silk Fund comes from? From the student fee.
Oh yeah, so it's from the student fee. Yeah, and then it's sustainably invested.
Yes.
And since it's been divested from fossil fuels, it's actually performed far better on its return on investment, which is a fun fact that maybe like Concordia should consider for their investments. So, the governance structure.
I'm going to draw what you explain that.
Okay, so there is an executive team of 8 coordinators. I'm going to gesture vaguely at the 8 people sitting over there. They each have a different portfolio. So there's the general coordinator, the external affairs and mobilization coordinator, the internal affairs coordinator, the finance coordinator, the Loyola coordinator, the sustainability coordinator, the student life coordinator, the academic and advocacy coordinator. And the academic and advocacy coordinator oversees all the managers for the service departments. And the executive team is overseen by the council. Yeah, so council is like the final decision maker. So the executives have some like discretionary authority, but pretty much everything that executives do comes back to decisions made by the council. For example, there will be times where council votes on something and the executives are less than pleased about it, and they will spend their winter break troubleshooting online voting. That's a thing that could happen. Well, not this year because it's already been troubleshooted, but basically that's sort of an example. The council makes decisions and the executives have to execute them. For financial dispenses over $50,000, they have to come to council. Council also has to approve expenditures from the Silk Fund unless it's over $250,000, and then that goes to referendum right away so that no one, like for example, right now, quorum for council for your mandate is 6, so 6 people couldn't just approve defunding the Silk Fund for a project. Anyway, but there are standing committees of council, and those are sort of like specializations. And yeah, so you're the board of directors. It's comprised of up to 30 undergraduate students divided proportionally between faculty based on enrollment, which is written in our bylaws. So to change that, it would have to go through referendum. The decisions of council can be appealed to the judicial board. Stop laughing at me.
I'm just laughing at you, you're funny.
So basically, let's say the council does something that goes against a position on by the student body at large. So like a referendum happened and students were like, this is something that we support, and that's in the regulations. If the council takes a decision that goes against that, you appeal to the judicial board and they can overturn that decision to align it with what's in the regulations. They also provide interpretation of the CSU governance documents, and most recently they were involved with elections, and they twice.
2 years in a row.
3 years in a row.
Yeah.
Let's say 4.
No.
Please no.
That's too much fun.
Please God. The role of council. So again, final decision makers, but there's some key things to take into account. All of this is student money. You are making decisions with student money, and those decisions are inherently political. Even if you think they aren't, the priorities that you have within your budget, that's right, finance coordinator-elect, reflect the priorities of the CSU as an institution. There are things that have to be represented within that, and it's really important that when you're making choices and you're making decisions and you're making motions in council, you're always conscious that if you're an arts and science representative, you're representing the 17,000 arts and science students. If you're a JMSB representative, you're representing the
9,000.
Thanks. 9,000 JMSB students. If you're a GCS, Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science student, you're representing the,
7,500.
it's actually
It's
8,000.
It's 11,000, it went up. That's why they got 8 seats, that's what I could be crazy.
Yes, it did go up, but it went up from 7,000 to 8,600-ish,
Oh,
I believe. And then it was proportionally divided up. Anyway, I did that math, it's fine. Yeah, also, every decision you make is real, and it has, like, day-to-day implications. So if you vote to do something and have the executives do something, that's a choice that will affect students. For example, council voted to have a recovery and wellness community center for students in recovery from addiction. And that was a real choice that is going to make a really positive impact next year. But sometimes those decisions can have negative effects, and you also need to be cognizant of that as well. So just remember, your votes are students.
Hey Sophie, how can we know what the will of the students might be?
A good question.
So, if only there were a way to know.
If only. We have an annual undergraduate survey now, which shows us directly what students want to see from the CSU. But we also have a possessions book, which was voted on by student representatives and in referendum. So that's a really good way of like seeing where the values of the institution align. And also you can ask them. You can just ask students. That's a fun thing you can do. Also, as a counselor, it's kind of your job to check in with your constituents, right? You're not just here as like a lone wolf. You're also here as like a representative of people who democratically elected you, so you should pay them some time and ask them how they feel.
And all the information contained are accessible to you, and you should read them because you have to vote on them legally. You have to vote the way the students vote.
Correct.
Important to read.
Important to read.
Reading is essential.
Also I have a little nifty slide on some of my favorite articles from the Act respecting the accreditation and financing of students' associations, which is how the CSU is an accredited institution. Thanks, Quebec in 1982. I don't think they meant to give us this power.
Definitely not, and you can also read this. It's a really fun act to read because you can definitely see the students sitting around being like, and we want furniture. Yeah, they have to buy us furniture. Yeah, make them get us furniture. And like we want phone lines. Yeah, and we have to buy us all phone lines. Like we just like came up with all these and just like gave it to the Quebec government. The Quebec government had to sign it. So
Yeah, the Quebec government was like,
Little did they know.
So, Article 28 grants us the right to be recognized by the administration. We have a right to office space and furniture free of charge. Again, please give us sofas, thank you. And we have a right to appoint student representatives who are called to sit on governing bodies
100% of the time.
100% of the time. It's in the law. And any general or special provision that goes against any provision within this act is without force or effect. So, yeah. Also, we're audited every year. We get an audit of our financial statements so that we're super transparent with that. That's another fun fact. We're a corporation, we're a company, we're a nonprofit. So we're not doing this just to profit off of student union fees, unlike, arguably some people. So, yeah, that's kind of an important thing to note, is that this is to give back to students and break even, not turn a profit. And now I get to talk about the super fun code of conduct. Woo. Well, anyway, I think there's some tech difficulties. Basically, the code of conduct of the sexual violence and safer spaces policy, are these two documents that I spent many months with Michaela and some folks from policy committee writing. So, right now we're going to talk about the code of conduct because it's pretty important. It sets out community guidelines and just like roles and responsibilities of everyone as a student representative. I don't know if you've ever perused the link archives, but there's always some real fun dirt you can dig up about what happened before we had a code of conduct in several years past and not so distant past. And basically, what this sets out is like your expected behavior. You're expected to know and read all of the policies of the union, including these. You're expected to abide by them. You're also expected to treat people with basic respect. Yeah, so some things that we did with this was we made it easier to hold counselors and appointed representatives accountable. Executives were pretty easy to impeach, I'll say. It takes like 10 representatives signing a letter and 5 to 10 business days notice in a special council meeting, and then a 2/3 majority vote of council can do it under bylaw 10. But there's like more difficulty when it comes to elected members of a board. And so to do that, we set up these sort of guidelines, and also for appointed people, because they're just sort of there, like they're appointed by the council, and while there is a process to get rid of them, it's hard to sort of follow through on, because what if someone's just not showing up? How do you dismiss someone without seeing them? I mean, you can, it's just not super great, but this sets out basically what you agree to as a representative. You agree to be respectful and just follow the rules that are written for you. And you also agree to sign the policy waiver, saying that you understand what's in these. So the policy waiver essentially says that like, you've gone over these policies, these are important community guidelines for you, and you understand that as an elected representative, you're beholden to them. And once you sign that, it also acknowledges that should you be found to be in like an egregious breach of these like codes, you can be deemed resigned, and likely will be deemed resigned if you're found guilty. It sets out an appeal process, a complaints process, it goes to the judicial board, it also sets up for a third-party ombudsperson when judicial board doesn't feel that they're the best equipped to handle those complaints. And also, if you want to appeal, you appeal to the third-party ombudsperson, because before, if you had a complaint against someone that went to judicial board, you appealed to council, and you can see how that might get a little complicated. So yeah, the one I'm really excited about is probably your sexual violence and safer spaces policy. This was a labor of love. A couple of years ago, there were some really sketchy people who had positions of authority who shouldn't have and were abusers, and the only thing that we could do as an organization was just ask them to resign. There was no legal way for us to actually like remove them from office for being abusers. So yeah, this, unlike the Concordia University policy on sexual violence, stands alone. It has an entirely different complaints process, and it's super great. It outlines, like the code of conduct, potential sanctions, and how evidence will be like considered, as well as what rules of natural justice apply and how. So rather than doing like for the sexual violence policy, we do the balance of probabilities, which is based on the evidence you have, what is most likely to have occurred, rather than beyond reasonable doubt, which, like the current criminal justice system, is incredibly problematic for survivors of sexual violence. Haha! So, yeah, basically, I have a few paper copies if anyone wants to like read them over today, but it's also available online, and yeah, you have to read them over. I'm super excited about them. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah. If there's like an appeal, is the advocacy center that is going to defend us?
No. I mean, maybe, but technically this is an internal process to the CSU. So if you're going under this, this is just the CSU and CSU bodies that are hearing it. It doesn't apply to like external investigation procedures. You can file a complaint under our sexual violence policy and also under the universities, and those will be two separate processes. Yeah.
Okay, another one. About a point you mentioned before, you said that the council is going to appoint students in all governing bodies. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so appointments committee and academic caucus appoint students to governing bodies, which is made up of members of council as well as elected senators and executives. Basically, what that means is there are certain seats that are for students at large or for students in certain faculties, and we'll do a call out to those students and they will apply, and then you go through an interview process and they're appointed, and then they're also beholden to like the policy because they are representing the CSU and its members within that role. That's so on standing committees, that's like the student at large who sits on finance is appointed through the appointments process.
Yeah, so first I'm thrilled that we have just reworked our sexual violence policy and a new code of conduct policy. But now since this is separate, this is independent from the school's current setting policy, I suppose I just wanted to make sure that they didn't contradict, and also what do we have that's actually enforceable to hold, for example, admin accountable?
Apart from our massive legal contingency fund. So what we have to hold the admin accountable is we have student representatives on governing bodies that aren't currently being loopholed by certain people. So on the standing committee, we have undergraduate representation. On Senate, we have undergraduate representation. And on the Board of Governors, we have undergraduate representation. And those are the people who are going to these committees and really voicing student desires. And apart from that, we also have the campaigns department, who does more grassroots organization and mobilizing people to be aware of these issues. Because that way we have people on the ground who are supporting what students are saying in these committee meetings that are often in closed session and very confidential and can't legally be spoken about super openly, which is a whole other can of worms. But it doesn't contradict the university's policies, it's separate from them, which means that you can have a decision made under this and you can try and bring that decision to the administration, but it's not going to interact. And the reason for that is that we're two different legal entities. So much like a decision by the university can't impact CSU and what our appointment process is, CSU can't make a decision that impacts the administration unless we're voting down a policy at Senate or voting down a policy at the board, which we only have one voting undergraduate on the board, so like usually it's just me saying, no thank you. Sometimes not as polite, but depends on if it's an open or closed session. Yeah, that's kind of, the mechanisms for holding administration accountable are really through the administration governing bodies. What we're trying to do is hold CSU members and CSU representatives accountable in our policies. Does that?
Yeah.
Isaiah?
Future appointments appoints every single student at large for the committees.
For standing committees.
And
Academic caucus deals with Senate and university governing bodies, which usually goes through the academic and advocacy coordinator. So like, for example, if there's an ad hoc committee that's called by like research the CSU has done and presented to Senate on like, I don't know, fall reading week, and there are student representatives on it, they go through the CSU academic and advocacy coordinator and academic caucus for that appointment process. But for the other appointments process, it's through the CSU appointments committee. Anything else? Welcome to council. You don't have to clap. Thanks. Thank you. I will be sending like a package document to whoever the new chair is, but also the incoming executive, so y'all can have it too. And if you didn't get your policy waiver, there's more at the front. All right. If you've signed it, hand it in to me or the CSU reception, and I'll have like a little folder ready, and then we'll handle it there. CSU offices are open Monday through Friday with reduced summer hours, which I learned the hard way when I walked upstairs and the offices were closed at noon and I was confused. All right.
don't you have a key?
Yeah, but I left my key at the office. All right. Either Fiduciary or Robert?
Yeah, probably.
Okay, cool.
I'm just trying to email myself so that I can send it.
Can I ask you a random question?
Mm-hmm.
What do I have to write on the third line? As like our mandate for this year, or?
As like your position.
Oh, okay.
So like as JMSB representative, or that's your case. Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries. I put my water bottle over there.
Yeah.
I mean,
you wanna
It's
sign
not
all our
that I'm
papers?
signing with-
Oh, okay.
Do you hold us
yeah,
accountable?
I am the chair.
Accountable.
4 days.
Oh
God, this is so-
There should be a civic most way.
I mean, I feel like most of this is like common sense, you make sure.
Don't break it, I'm not sure if I can sign off on this.
I'm sorry, if you sue the CSU because you've been removed for bad behavior, you have issues, that's all I'm saying. And the conversation ends there.
Council starts next week.
Yeah, that's it.
Jeremy, when I'm in office, I don't have time for
You know, we hate this one.
I'm orientation.
If there's a lawsuit, I would personally go find the person and tell them that they're psychotic, that's it, that's all.
I think it's more just like there's lots of I mean, like
That happens.
You don't disagree?
if you're person is like an executive, but you're just like unite, eliminate.
Ooh, stop.
Yeah.
Bad Boys 2 style.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention this when I was talking about the code of conduct and the sexual violence policy waiver. It wasn't just me writing them. Our legal team also spent months putting them together with us and going through every draft to make sure it was entirely legal and within our jurisdiction to have a policy that stipulates all of these things.
Regardless, it's common sense, you respect everybody that you see, and that's it.
And don't disagree with that.
I know, I'm just saying.
All right, I guess I'm the unofficial chair.
Robert Rules! How to make motion, guys?
Ah, there we go. Sorry, that was an endeavor.
Chair.
Yes.
Can you please bend the light?
Yes. Perfect. Okay. Is everyone good with the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
Let's do that.
So I'll introduce myself. My name's Caitlin Robinson. I've been the chair of the CSU since 2015 or 2016, and before that, for 3 years, I was the minute keeper. So this isn't my first rodeo, and if you have any questions, don't hesitate to send me an email or just ask me outright. This presentation was developed for the CSU, and then it was modified for another organization who requested that it be 90 minutes long. So I'm gonna skip through some of it because I had to extend it very much. So don't be afraid by the mass amounts of text. We will get through this, and I'll just try to focus on the most important parts of Robert's Rules. So first of all, who here has ever been at a council meeting, like ASFA, CSU? Perfect, that is wonderful. For those who haven't though, I don't want you to feel overwhelmed, and I don't want you to go into a meeting and have, like, if you have a lack of knowledge of Robert's Rules, I don't want that to prevent you from feeling like you can speak up or for voting, anything like that. So I really want this to be as accessible as possible for everyone in the room. So this is the things we're going to go over, some of them a little bit quicker than others. So basically how to conduct a meeting, understanding motions, how to support, how to oppose, a couple of useful tricks and tips, and then a bit of a question and answer period. Basically, the most important things that I want you to understand though are how to make a motion, some of the logistics of the CSU, planning meetings, what you expect from me, what I expect from you, and basically just how to respect each other, how to speak to each other, observing proper decorum, things like that. So just things that are going to make the meetings run a lot smoother and avoid lots of controversy and all that. So what is Robert's Rules of Order? Basically, it's a set of rules. It's about EA big. I think it's like 800 pages. It was written by Henry Robert in 1876. Sorry, forgetting that. And it's basically just how to run a meeting and how to run a meeting properly and orderly. So as a student representative, understanding how meetings run under Robert's Rules of Order is the key to its success. All meetings follow an agenda, which will be distributed to you on the Friday before council. So council meetings are always on a Wednesday. You will expect me to send you all of the documents, including the agenda, by Friday. Yes, Jared?
And what happens in the event of a special council? How do agendas work then?
That's so much later in the presentation,
Never
though.
mind.
I'll explain the like the other kinds of meetings and what happens. Don't worry. So yeah, basically agenda points are submitted by either executives or yourself before Friday at 5 p.m. So you literally just send me an email. You say I want to submit this point. Here are the documents that go with it. I add it to the agenda and it gets sent out to council. So very, very simple. Just remember to do it before Friday, because between Friday and Wednesday, the agenda is not modifiable. So if there's something really pressing that you need on the agenda by Wednesday, let me know so I can send out the documents. But under point 3 in the agenda, which is approval of the agenda, you're going to have to make a motion to add it, and then it's council's decision on whether they'll accept it or not. In the interest of doing things a bit more efficiently, it's always good to try to have all your stuff in by Friday, but some exceptions are granted. All the meetings are headed by a chairperson or speaker, which is myself for the moment, and it facilitates discussion between representatives. So the way I see my job is not a disciplinarian, it's not to tell you what to do, but it's to facilitate the meeting. So it's to facilitate the discussion, to try to guide you in the right direction if things are going horribly off track, but it's not to scream at you and tell you you're doing stuff wrong. That's not what I do. So to speak, raise your hand or placard. Oh, I had one. Anyways, you'll get a placard, it'll have your name and your faculty on it. When you want to talk, you just raise it and then I put you on a speaker's list and address you. Use your speaking turn productively, because it could be a while before you get a chance to speak again. So there's a speaker's list. Sometimes when points are contentious, everybody's placard goes up at the same time, and I put them out 1 through 20. And if you've spoken, then you go to the bottom of the list if you want to speak again. So just a reminder to use your time wisely. No personal attacks are tolerated under Robert's Rules. Respectful decorum is of utmost importance for a meeting to run well. So what does that mean? Basically, under Robert's Rules, you're not going to be attacking each other and you're not going to be speaking to each other. You address the chair when you speak, so you're not going to be turning, like, even if you disagree with something that another representative said, you don't turn to them and say, like, I disagree with you, I don't believe that. You would use your speaker's turn to speak through the chair and express your opposition in a respectful manner. So, as well, no swearing in council. Yes, I know people always laugh when I say that, but like when you show up to work, basically this is a professional environment, you're all directors on a board, so I expect you to behave professionally and respectfully to each other, and to me, and to your executives. So understanding motions. So this is how action becomes, basically how the council decides to take action on a particular item. So the introduction and debate of motions, which is a statement that asks a particular action or policy is to be enacted, are fundamental to any meeting under Robert's Rules. So they can be introduced by any representative or executive at the CSU. The difference between executives and representatives in the meeting is that you folks have a vote, the executives do not. They can propose motions. So there's 2 parts to a motion. There's the whereas and the be it resolved part. So one gives it context and one is saying the action. Sophie, give me an example of motion.
I move to adjourn. Make a whereas.
Okay, sorry.
Whereas the CSU referendum in 2012 ratified a motion in favor of accessible education, be it therefore resolved that the CSU Council allocate an extra $10,000 to the fight against international tuition hikes.
Perfect. That was an excellent example. So you can see the whereas, which is contextualizing, so there's a bit of background, and the be it resolved, which is the action that council is deciding to take. The thing about whereas clauses is they should be something objective. So it's not your opinion, like whereas I believe that something. No, it's just some context to the motion and then the be it resolved. Because sometimes motions go on for 8 years with the whereas clauses, and a lot of them are out of order because they're just people's opinions anyway. So we'll try to cut that down and make it just background. Here it is. Yeah, there's an example there, but Sophie's was better. So, what happens when that's not the one I wanted. What happens when a motion is introduced for consideration? That's not the right slide. So, what happens when a motion is put on the floor for consideration? Just ignore that for a moment. So, Sophie has read the motion, and then the next thing that we need is a second in order for it to belong to the room. So, after Sophie reads the motion, somebody else would say, I second that. Or if they forget, I will say, anyone second. Then somebody raises their placard and they go in the minutes as the seconder. So the second that a motion is seconded, it belongs to the entire room. It no longer belongs to Sophie. So for example, if the motion had never been seconded and everyone just sat there in silence, Sophie could be like, I rescind, never mind, don't want to talk about that. And that's fine. But Sophie cannot take back the motion after it's been seconded. Yes, Jared?
What happens if they don't want to rescind? Does it automatically get rescinded?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's about it.
I wanted to clarify.
Yeah. Yes, Isaiah.
So when things are motioned, the discussion on the table has to center around that specific motion.
Yes, absolutely. And debate is the next thing. So once the motion is put on the table, the next thing that happens is debate. So before council debates, Sophie, as the mover, would get the first speaking turn to motivate for the motion itself, or else it's hard to contextualize. And then Sophie would say, why is this motion relevant, why I want to move it, and then after that, debate begins with all of council, and that's when the speaking list is taken. So this is literally the most important thing about how council runs. It's motion, second, mover, speaks, and then for debate opens. So literally, if you can know this, you'll understand 3/4 of what's going on in any council meeting. Because council meetings run under Robert's rules, if you've never been a part of them, can be very disorienting. So just remember this and you're almost good to go. After that, there are some specifics about voting. So for example, some motions, and I think I've got a paper that says which ones they are that I will send out. Some motions in the bylaws and under Robert's rules require a 2/3 majority. So after the debate is completed and the chair will say, is there any further speakers? If there's not, we move to a vote. So then you would vote for, against, or abstain. Like I said, some motions require 50% plus 1, some require a 2/3, and under the CSU's bylaw, standing regs, I think there's one that requires a 4/5 or something like that. Or actually, I'm pretending not to know it. The one that requires the 4/5 is to overturn a judicial board decision. So that's in like very, very specific cases that aren't super relevant right now. So, yes, Jared.
Hypothetically, what is considered 2/3? 2/3 of everyone, or 2/3 between yes and no?
Good question. So, the thing about voting, you have yes, you have no, and you have abstain. So, if you have 20 counselors in a room, and then 8 vote yes, and then 4 vote no, and then 8 abstain, in order to get your 2/3 or your 66%, you're only counting these ones. So to do the math, I would go 8 plus 4 equals 12. Does 8 over 12 equal 66? God, I can't do math in front of people. It does.
It's exactly 66.
Yes, there we go. Sorry, it is very stressful to do math in front of a room of people. I don't know how professors do it. So yeah, you only count the yeses and the nos. The abstains basically means that they're not part of the vote. So those don't go into the final count. So the life and death of a motion. Once again, just to reiterate, the motion is read aloud, an individual seconds, the creator of the motion speaks, discussion begins, a representative may call the question. So we didn't cover that as well. So if debate's gone on for a little while, it's kind of getting circular, everybody has felt the need to say the things they need to say, a representative on their speaker's turn may raise their placard and say, I call the question. So that means that you want to end debate, even if there's like 15 people still on the speaker's list. It just means that you've kind of sussed out the room and people are tired of listening to this, and we think that it's time to move to a vote. So in that case, what I would do is say, is there any opposition to the call to question? If there's none, we consider it unanimous and move straight to a vote. But if one person raises their placard and say, I oppose, that means we have to vote on the call to question. So a call to question always requires a 2/3 majority. So at that point, I'd say all those in favor of calling the question, people would raise their placards yes or no. If it gets a 2/3 majority, we would move straight to vote on the motion. If the call to question is defeated, then we just go back into debate. So calling the question is a good thing to do if you want to make things efficient, but because it requires that extra vote, if the room isn't amenable to it, you just end up adding another step. So use your call to questions wisely as well. And then once again, a final vote takes place unless the vote isn't called for. So there you go. All the math is there.
Yes, Sophie. Let's say I'm like tired of the debate after 3 people and I call the question because I'm next on the speakers list. Is that okay?
No. It's 8 people. So the thing about calling the question is that sometimes it can get abused, I guess. Like if somebody's just like, I want to move and I don't want to hear what anyone has to say, they can call the question, but that's not okay because we still need to leave room for debate. So 8 kind of seems like a happy number. I think Robert's Rules says something about, I can't remember the direct quote, but it's when enough people have spoken that it feels democratic. If you want the direct quote, just let me know afterwards. So 8 seems like a round number. You can't do it after 2 or 3 or 4. Thank you. All right, amendments. So if you have your motion on the table and you want to change it, you're okay with the motion in general, but there's a couple things that you want to see maybe modified. So in that case, you would propose an amendment. So at this point, we're in debate. Somebody on the speaker's list who has raised their placard and been addressed by me would say, I move to amend the motion. There's 3 ways to amend the motion. You can either remove, you can either add, or you can modify, basically. So insert, delete, or replace. So at that point, you would say, I move to amend the motion to say, yes, Sophie.
So for like the example where I said $10,000 to the fight against international student tuition, I guess, okay, I'm going to pretend that I'm someone else. I, as someone else and not me, I guess even as me,
Yeah.
could be like, I motion to amend to increase the amount to $30,000, and then that would be the thing up for debate.
Yeah, so Sophie has moved to amend the motion. That also requires a second, and then debate begins again with a whole new speakers list. So if you have your speakers list here, then there's a move to amend, and another speakers list starts with the exact same procedure as before. So you can call the question, people are debating, but they're only debating about the amendment at this point. So in some cases, to make things go faster, if the amendment is really simple, I could just say, is this a friendly amendment? Everyone's okay with it. It passes by unanimous consent. But the second that somebody's not okay with it, we move to debate. So go through debate, vote on the amendment, and then we go back to the speakers list. So if the amendment is added, we're now talking about the amended motion. If the motion is, if the amendment is opposed, is defeated, we're going back to the motion, but not changed. It's a lot easier to see in practice, and hopefully this will occur at our first meeting at some point, and then you'll see it happen and you'll understand what it means, because it's a little bit abstract to explain. All amendments must be in the spirit of the original motion, meaning they must be related to the original motion and not change the motion entirely. The chair may rule an amendment out of order if it's not found to be in the spirit of the main motion. So for example, Sophie's motion is moving to give $10,000 to the Silk Fund. You can't also add, and I move to amend to add another, be it further resolved to use the money.
5,000 of those dollars to the Jared House bank account.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. That would be out of order to begin with. But you couldn't make a motion that had nothing to do with the original motion, like to buy a Christmas tree or something like that. Like something completely ridiculous. So all the amendments have to be in the spirit of the main motion. Yes?
I have a question. Does that mean you also can't amend to say, I motion to actually give $0 to this cause?
Yeah, at that point, you would just vote down the motion. Because it's not giving no, you would basically be amending to be the opposite of the motion, which is not a thing you can do because it's not in the spirit of the main motion. So if you said, I move to amend to say $0, that would be out of order, and I would tell you, just vote against it, because that's how you talk, is with your vote. Yes, Isaiah, and then James.
In the spirit of the debate, if we decided 10,000 was too much, we could be like, we amend to, or Sophie could amend to bring it down to 8,000.
Yep, but the spirit of the motion is still to give money to the organization, or to the,
I don't know.
to give money to the thing. Yeah, exactly. The spirit is not to do nothing. I hope that makes sense. It's kind of a discretionary thing, and I'll get to it, I think, later in the presentation, but if ever I call something out of order, and I need you to understand this, if ever you're not okay with a decision that the chair makes, you can move to challenge the chair. So if ever I say, nope, that's out of order, Isaiah, you can't do that, Isaiah could say, I move to challenge the chair, and if council overrules me with a 50% plus 1, then, hey, go you. Yes, sorry, James.
Yeah, I was going to say something
Yes.
about how I was in a situation where that that exact thing happened, the exact opposite. I was in a mall UN committee, and that happened, but the chair allowed it because the amendment was hilarious. So I think that's a much different situation, so I'm just gonna let the thing go on and not waste anybody's time.
All right, thank you, James. That was very constructive. Sophie. Okay. That's another thing you can do is if you put yourself on the speakers list and it's been like 20 turns and you forget what you're going to say, if I call on you, you can just say I rescind. You don't feel obliged to speak because you put yourself on the list. Yes, I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
No, it's fine. Most of the time I don't either. I'm in this
Hi.
time. What happens if you forget what you wanted to say and then you remember like 4 seconds later? Like I will do at least 4 times during the school year.
I usually give people a chance.
Bring it up,
Like, give it a second, you're gonna be okay. And then if you're like, oh no, I really forget, usually council's amenable to putting you next because you didn't really say anything, but technically it's against Robert's rules. Yes, Jared?
You also technically could just put yourself back on the speakers.
Yes.
Sure, would
Yeah.
set you back, but like,
Yeah.
you can write it down and be like, oh, I remember this
Yes.
time.
Exactly. John?
I was gonna say.
Oh, Isaiah?
And then if someone said what you already said, you just said like John just did.
Yes, that is also very good. Yes, James?
Something else we can do, and that did happen previously this year, is that we motioned to prioritize certain types of people on the speakers list. So we could, for example, pass a motion saying that we prioritize somebody that hasn't spoken yet.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And like, so you wouldn't need to be at the bottom of the 20 list if you haven't spoken at all, you just be,
Yeah, it's up to council. Yes, Sophie?
Isn't the prioritizing people who hasn't spoken yet already?
Yeah, it is. Technically, you're, like, under Robert's rules, we use a modified version of Robert's rules. Under Robert's rules, you're only allowed to speak twice. But if I had to enforce that, or if any chair had to enforce that, it would just be chaos because we constantly have to vote to allow for more speakers' turns. So it's kind of understood in the student body that, like, it's chill, don't worry about it. But, yeah, first-time speakers should have priority. And in the standing ranks as well, gender parity is observed. What else? What happens after the vote? So, if a motion receives enough votes in favor of it, it's approved and council moves on to the next agenda point. Straightforward. If the motion is rejected, it's temporarily defeated but can be brought back for consideration with a simple majority. I'm going to explain this and it's very abstract until you see it happen once again. So, a motion is defeated, but if you want to bring it back later in the council meeting, it has to be brought back by somebody who was on the presiding side. Because the thing is that if you voted, let me try to explain this properly. If you voted on the side that lost and you just kept bringing back the motion, that would be very annoying and it's called dilatory under Robert's rules. So only the person who voted in the way that passed, who changed their mind, can bring a motion back for reconsideration at the same meeting. Yes, Jared?
So like, if that thing we said about $10,000 or $8,000, I forgot the number at this point.
Yes.
If I vote no and
Yes.
it fails,
Yes.
and then later I'm like, that was a bad decision, I can bring up my placard and be like,
Exactly.
actually, this is what I think we should actually reconsider this. Maybe
Yes.
it's a good idea.
You may do that. Exactly. Yeah, so it must receive a minimum of 50% plus 1 of the vote. Because the thing is that like if you were on the losing side and you just keep bringing it up, the vote's not going to change. So that's the whole point of being on the I don't want to say the winning side, but the presiding side to bring it back up. Yes, Jared.
Another, this is
Yeah.
question. If like that situation happens and I say I want to reconsider, and 50% plus 1 vote to reconsider, does this mean the motion passes or that we reopen debate on the motion?
That you reopen debate on the
Okay.
motion. Yeah, so it'd be a motion to reconsider a
So you
defeated
could
motion.
be against the motion but think that there wasn't enough debate, therefore I still want to reconsider it, and then still vote no.
Yes.
Okay.
But hopefully we never do this. I've actually not seen it done in practice at the CSU at the same meeting. Because it's very rare that somebody changes their mind at the same meeting over something. So yeah, this is something that does not happen very often, but if it does, we'll know what to do. So if you want to reconsider something passed in a previous meeting, you have to rescind something previously adopted, and it requires a 2/3 majority without notice or a simple majority with notice. So most of the time, if you give me proper notice, which means by Friday, you say I want to reconsider this motion that happened last council meeting, all it requires is it goes on the agenda and it's a 50% plus 1. If during the meeting something comes up and it's not like it hasn't been given enough notice, so it hasn't gone out with the Friday documents, then it requires a 2/3 majority. This does not happen basically at all because we follow the agenda 95% of the time. So it would be highly, not out of order, but it would be not procedurally, it would not be a good idea to just bring up something randomly in the meeting because you want it to change something that happened before. Yes, Eduardo?
Well, just going to the question of what happened this year, with the Cs, how it was shut down,
Yes.
but then 4 councillors chose to bring it back.
Yeah, and
Because it was 4, not 50% plus 1, should it have been disallowed?
Yeah, it's the vote, sorry, I should have made that clear. So any one councillor can bring it back, but it was sent out with the Friday document, so that meant it was given adequate notice. Any one councillor can do that, but the vote itself, when voting on the motion, is a 50% plus 1.
I think I understand where the confusion is. It was brought back at a special council meeting, which requires 3 councillors to.
As a councillor who signed that paper, you need one councillor to bring it back, as she
Yeah.
said, but it wasn't at a special meeting, it was at a regular meeting, but because we brought it back, I think you had a minimum of 3, but regardless, like,
But-
Sophie will tell you, she knows all.
It's
There
two
was a
different things.
misunderstanding.
Yeah.
People thought they had to call a special meeting, but they just had to put it on the regular agenda. So a letter was circulated to call a
Yeah.
special meeting when it should have just put on the agenda. And so there was a misunderstanding.
Yeah, because to call the meeting requires 3 people, but I'm just talking about the vote, so that's a 50% plus 1. So like to send stuff out with the documents, you could be one person and ask for a motion to be reconsidered, but in order for that to be accepted, like voted on during the meeting, your motion that you sent out, it requires 50% plus 1 and not a 2/3. Perfect. Yes, Isaiah, or are you just doing this?
That was the question.
Yes.
In terms of, shoot, I pulled them all these, but no, it's really, okay. It was to your point, these are unlikely. Every meeting at the beginning, do we approve the agenda?
Yes,
That's at the
we
first
do,
one.
yes.
So isn't that the most likely scenario where you would see a point added to the agenda?
Yep, that is it. But in the interest of being fair to all counselors, we shouldn't be surprising people with motions. So that's why I say I really, really want people to send in their documents by Friday, because something super contentious that people aren't prepared for, if it shows up on an agenda on the Wednesday, like, you need to understand as well that like when I get motions, I have to review them to make sure that they're in accordance with the standing regulations, with the bylaws, things like that. Counselors have to properly understand the documents. So it's like if you do that with a super long and contentious motion, it's really not a good thing for the union. So that, yes, sorry, I don't know your
Naomi.
Naomi.
Just to confirm, if we're reconsidering a motion, we have to like, let's say I disagreed with it, I had to have like disagreed with it previously to reconsider it at the next, or no? Or am I confusing
No, that,
it?
yeah, so the only time the presiding side has to change their mind if it's in the same meeting. If it's at a different
Oh,
meeting,
okay.
you could vote whatever and then bring
So
it
I
back
could
up.
bring back like
Yep.
a motion, like,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, this once again is something that sometimes you need to see in practice or have a situation where this actually occurs to fully understand it, because it's a little bit complex to explain. But if you have any questions at all, do not hesitate to ask. I like this, it's good. How to support a motion. So, what's the best way to support a motion, Sophie?
Vote for it.
Yes. So it's good to debate the motion, but going in circular debate, like absolutely be in favor of your motion or be in favor of somebody else's motion, say why you think it's valid. But the thing is, when we have 5 or 6 counselors saying the exact thing over and over and over again, at some point the way to support the motion is just to vote for it. Yes, Jared?
If that happens, I will always call the question, like, it's going to happen, I
Yeah.
guarantee you, so just be ready.
That is good. Thank you. So yeah, when discussion opens, raise your placard, put you on the speakers list, try to state opinions regarding a motion that haven't been discussed. Avoid hearsay, remember no ad hominem attacks, so no taking a motion and saying, this is a stupid idea. Like, no, use professional, respectful language as well and state the reasons that you oppose the motion. Should you like to change the motion, propose an amendment, as I said, or if you feel the matter is well debated, then you can call the question, as Jared said, usually requires 8 speakers' turns. Yes, Isaiah?
So during the debate process, how would it move? So if someone says a point, but you can refute the point through the chair.
Sorry? I didn't
Like,
quite catch
okay,
that.
so let's say someone, in the case of your $10,000 example, and I'm like, I'm next on the speakers list, I'm like, I don't believe that giving $10,000 is because the Silk Fund has enough money.
Yeah, perfect.
Basic point or whatnot.
Yep.
Sophie can then raise her hand in the speakers list and be like, I do believe that we should give the Silk Fund after like
Yep.
giving a different a reasoning that kind of like debates mine.
Yes, yeah, yes, Sophie?
Can I?
Yeah.
And for example, like I could reference what you had said, but I couldn't be like, you said this. I would say, as my colleague Isaiah mentioned with regards to the finances of the Silk Fund, actually this is the case.
Yeah, or like I'm in disagreement
Yeah,
with
I
it
disagree
because-
with
yeah.
what, yeah.
Yeah, so the thing about, I'll get to in 1 second, the thing about the speakers list is it is not instant gratification. So you might hear something that you absolutely disagree with and you want to raise your placard and respond directly, but I gotta put you after 15 people. So it kind of teaches you as well to like hold on to your passionate speeches and to say them when appropriate. Yes, sorry, what's your name?
Yes.
Yes.
So I was just wondering, when can motions exactly be suggested? And also, do they require only one person to second it for it to be considered?
Yes.
Or do you also have to approve of it?
I mean, like I do have to approve of it, but 99% of the time, like I already know what the motion is, and so it's kind of implied that I've approved of it. If it's something that counters the bylaws or the standing regs, that's why I said it's always good to submit them before Friday, because I have to verify that. So I will tell you, like the person who submitted the motion directly and say, hey, maybe take out this, be it further, or be it resolved, or like your motion just completely is not or in order, so I can't accept it. And then the other question you had
Was when, so let's say we're in the middle of a debate and I say, well, actually I have this other idea, can I suggest it then?
If it pertains to the motion at hand, you would be able to move to amend the motion, but if it's a completely separate motion and there's already a motion on the floor being debated, you have to wait until the vote has been passed. So, yeah. Anything else? I got I saw a hand. Jared?
Yeah, so we were mentioning how like you have to write on the speakers list. What if somebody says something and you aren't entirely sure what they meant by that?
Next. Yes, oh yes.
Just a second question. So let's say, is there any sort of motion to call for an open discussion where people can freely move around the room? Or is that just not a thing under Robert's rules?
I think that's, yeah, you could do that. That's a thing under Code Verano though, that I think you might be referencing, where you can just like have a conversation. You can suspend the rules to do it. It's not advisable because sometimes it takes up a lot of time, but usually things can be done with debate. Yes?
Yeah, no, so there's a few ways that I've seen it done. I've seen it done mostly somebody simply, in kind of like a more formalized way. Somebody would just motion to, okay, suspend the rules for 50 minutes or suspend the rules for 20 minutes and then you go walk around, have a discussion. But it's usually that's happened in the context of like, in Molly 1, you either do for an unmoderated caucus, which is what that's called, or if you do a more stricter version of the rules, you ask for a suspension of the rules of procedure. But usually it's when you're actually working on a paper, and usually like in council, that's everything that's been worked on has already been presented. You don't have to work on anything extra, right? So it's usually not necessary to do that.
If all things go fully according to plan, like you'll know in advance everything that's going to be on the agenda and everything that's going to be discussed, and you can like think about the things you're going to say before, so you don't. There have been some occasions where council had to review a document, and then in that case, I just kind of give you adequate time to look it over and peruse it, and yeah, that's about it. But thanks, I didn't actually know that about Model UN. What else? How to oppose a motion. So, in the same vein, the best way to oppose a motion is to vote against it. The second best way is to speak against it. So once again, speak in opposition of your motion, be clear. If you object to a part of the motion but not the whole thing, you can always amend it. You can remove something, amend it, move something, add, delete, etc., etc. Say you have a motion with 2 be it further resolves, and you think one is going to be super contentious and we're going to talk about it forever, and the other one's really, really straightforward, you can move to divide the motion. So that means that we would only consider the first part for the first part of debate, and then we consider the second part as well. So you just check that box for the first one, get it over and done with, and then we open debate on the contentious motion to kind of keep the discussion centered on that part of the motion that you want to talk about. Yes, Jared?
what happens if, hypothetically, someone has a motion that I really like, someone else doesn't like the motion, and they make an amendment that I don't like, and the motion is added, it's amended, and then the entire motion gets shut down. Am I allowed to reintroduce the original motion?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Because at that point it would be, you would be able to because you voted against it. So if you weren't okay with it, then you would say no. And then if the motion passed, that was amended, because you were on the no side, which was the side that did not preside, you could bring it back with the way that I said before.
Okay.
And if ever this happens, I will explain it to you as it's going along. Don't worry, you don't have to like memorize this before you show up to council. What else? So you can postpone indefinitely, so that means you're killing the motion for a particular session. If it's something that maybe like council realizes actually the purview of the executive and not council, you can just say I move to postpone the motion indefinitely. The executive will deal with it and it'll never show up again unless somebody wants to bring it back. So that's just postponement. You can also motion to table the question. So if there's something that maybe council needs to look into before they can make an informed decision, you can say I move to table the motion until next meeting. So at that point it would show up on the agenda again, and then council could make an informed decision after educating themselves or reading whatever documents were necessary. You can also refer to the committee. So say somebody shows up with a whole bunch of standing regulation amendments. It's not really the purview of council to discuss the merits of each one in depth. That's actually something that the policy committee deals with. So somebody would say, I move to refer this to the policy committee. They would come back with their recommendations, and then council would make a decision. Just a note on committees as well. So if we're in a room with 30 people, that's not usually the most efficient way to debate like the subtleties of something like standing regulations. So standing committees are really where the expertise happens. So a policy committee would be, I think, 5. All the standing committees are 5 people, and they would look at this in depth. They would take their time to review stuff, and then council would come back. They would come back to council, and then council would make a decision based on that. Yes?
Standing committees are 5 voting members, and there's 1 non-voting member, and that's the general coordinator who's ex officio on all committees.
So yeah, standing committees are not useless. They're really the expertise. Not that hopefully anyone thought they were useless, but they're like, yeah, your subject matter experts. Useful tools for counselors. So sometimes representatives need to bring attention to a particular issue or require more information immediately rather than waiting on the speakers list. Robert's rules can help you with the following privileged motions. So, for example, you're in a meeting and you can't hear because they're vacuuming outside because it's past 11 p.m. Oh my god, that's happened before. What you would do is you would raise your placard and you say, point of personal privilege, I can't hear the person speaking, could we shut the door? So you don't have to wait 20 people on the list if there's like an atmospheric thing that's preventing you from hearing, or if you're freezing, or if it's too hot and we can't really do anything about that, but if there's atmospheric conditions, you would raise your hand and say, or your placard and say, point of personal privilege. There's something here that's preventing me from fully participating in the discussion. Yes, Jared?
I was just going to also add on to that. It also prevents us having to have 20 people say what they said again.
Yes.
Because if 20 people speak, and then and I'm on the speakers list, and then I say, can we close the door? Also, I didn't hear what those 20 people said, so let's go over it again.
Yes. Yeah, so that is also bad if you don't want to waste time like that. So, use your point of personal privilege wisely. Request for information. So a point of information can be used to ask a question relating only to the question being discussed. It must be related to the question, and it must be a question. So you can't raise your hand and say, point of information, I think this has no merit. That's not a point of information. That should be on the speaker's list, and you should also say it with slightly more respect. So a point of information is like, I'm trying to think of an example. Yes, Sophie?
Point of information, does this, like for example, I could, if we were discussing something and I'm unclear on what the logistics of the motion are, so like point of information, who would be responsible for this action?
Yes.
If it's not stipulated in the motion. So if there's like a motion to do something and I am like, who's gonna do the thing? That's a point of information.
Isaiah?
Also, like in your previous example, when you said 10,000, could a point of information like where is this money coming from, or
Yeah. What budget line or like, yeah.
So at that point, if I cannot answer the question, I I would grant a direct response to the executive. Point of information is really for something that can be solved in like 2 or 3 words. It's not to open a debate on a whole separate issue. It's really just like, okay, we're good, everyone's on the same page, let's move on. Point of order. So, for example, Sophie says, I want to allocate $500,000 to the Silk Fund. And then I say, yeah, sure, I'll accept that. Any one of you at any time who will know the standing regulations would say, point of order, that motion actually contradicts the bylaws, which say that it needs standing regulations.
Special bylaw J.
Bylaws that say it needs to go to referendum. And then I would say, oh yes, you're right, sorry, because I didn't do my due diligence, which hopefully I do. And then you would be correct. However, if I decided to dig my heels in and say, no, it's correct, then what would you do?
I challenge the chair.
There you go. Perfect. Yes, Elias.
So just to be certain, first of all, could I propose a point of order, be refused, challenge the
Yes.
chair?
Yep.
Okay.
And then it would be in council's hands. Hopefully it's like, that's pretty objective thing though, like point of order, it's either a yes or no type thing. Like sometimes the bylaws can be very ambiguous, however. But let's hope we don't run into those situations. But yes, you absolutely could, yes.
And challenging the chair, is it something also like that you just say out loud as you raise your placard, or do you have to be placed on the speaker's list?
I would, yes, Sophie?
You can interrupt.
Yeah, you can interrupt for that. Yeah, it's on the back of your placards. Yeah, sorry, that was an omission of mine, yes?
You can interrupt. It has to be seconded. The
Yes.
debate can only be on the validity of the motion itself, and then it needs a simple majority to pass.
So yeah, you only need 50% to overrule me. Usually if somebody does that, like I'll do my due diligence and try to find you the right answer. I'm not the kind of person to just dig my heels in and say, no, I'm right and you're wrong. But you never know what can happen. Orders of the day. So if, example, there's no motion on the table and we're just talking in circles, it's basically the call to question when there's no motion on the table. So somebody can say, I call for the orders of the day, and I will say, I accept, Jared, and we will move on with the agenda. Yes, Desiree, did you have a question? Oh, okay. Moving along. Types of motions. So there's this slide is still here. Sorry, it's full of so much text. So there's the main motion, which is made in the form of a resolution, and I will send all of this out to you. Don't worry about this. So it involves something that the Assembly will take action upon. So that was Sophie's motion from before with the whereas and the be it further resolved clause. So it's basically just, I move to do this. However, there are subsidiary motions that we talked about before. So this ranks higher than the main motion, and what that means is that when Sophie's motion is on the table, you can motion this. Usually, you can't have 2 motions on the table, but something like an amendment, obviously a main motion has to be on the table. Limiting debate, you can move and vote on that. Postponing indefinitely, laying on the table, referring to committee. So all of these happen when there's another motion on the table. Like, is that clear? Okay, perfect. And then there's also the privileged motion, so this takes precedence over all other motions, and those are things like rising to a question of privilege, adjourning, taking a recess, things like that. So there's a motion on the table, but you can always request a recess, you can request an adjournment, hopefully not when there's a motion on the table, but things like that are called privileged motions. There's also the incidental motions as well, so it relates in various ways to the motion at hand. The example would be challenging the chair, dividing the question, or choosing a method of voting. So there's a main motion on the table, but I say something you disagree with, you can challenge me, and then council can vote on it while that other motion is still there. Yes, Isaiah?
Methods of voting are either like secret ballot or placard.
Yes, and there is another method that I came across today. It is called voting by balls, and it's when you, no, I'm not joking, and it's when you have a white ball and a black ball, and the yeses vote with the white ball.
Yikes.
And I'm not, this was written in the 1800s, guys.
How is that different from the placards?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
You know-
it's easier because all you have to do is count the balls rather than count the placards and the airs.
Because instead of saying yes, raise your placards, no, everybody raises it at the same time.
What?
Folks, I didn't make this up. I swear it's in here.
There's
Yes.
that pressure, like when everybody, I see this in council, like you'll be putting your placards and some people, other people are voting.
Yeah.
And like raise their placards to match or to oppose.
Okay, point taken. Yes. So I guess it would be a way to counteract that. Like just imagine yourself with a placard that says yes and a placard that says no, and you raise it when you agree. And you don't raise it, or you raise it when you agree or disagree, but you have to choose the right one.
Do you just not raise your hand to abstain in that case?
I would presume yes. We have never done this. Please don't start. That's the only thing I can say to that. Yes, Jared.
If I vote the wrong way, like I think that let's just say the $10,000 motion, and maybe I wasn't paying attention, and I want to vote yes, and the yeses have already voted, and then when the noes vote, I put my placard up, and then you say, okay, it's 8-4, it's got or no, instead of 8-4, it's 7-5, doesn't pass, and I'm like, wait, what? I thought that I was on the side that was passing it. What happens then?
Well, you can request a recount, which really isn't a big deal. Like, you can just say, can we have a recount, and we can redo it. But also, please listen and raise your placards at the right time, so we avoid that. But yeah, you can just say, I'd like to request a recount, and then I say, okay, yeses, we recount, nos, we recount. And it's kind of a responsible thing to do as well, especially for the contentious motions that may pass by like one or not a lot of votes. And then there are motions that bring something again before the assembly. So that would be to discharge something from a committee. So that's the opposite of sending it to committee. You retake it from the committee. To take something from the table, to reconsider and rescind. So those are things we went through before. The names of the motions and the categories they fall into aren't important. Just know that you can do 2 through 5 when there's a main motion on the table. Types of council meetings. So this is a little bit more about council itself than actual Robert's Rules of Order. So we have regular council meetings. So these occur the second Wednesday of the month and the second and fourth Wednesday of October, November, and January. So I will be requesting the rooms within the coming week, and I'll hopefully be able to send you out a schedule with all of the council meetings for the rest of the year with the rooms that they will take place in. That way you can mark them on your agendas and you know exactly what's happening. In the agendas, you'll have a consent agenda for the regular meeting. So this will count all of the executive reports that'll come in. It'll count the committee minutes. It'll count my own report, the chairperson's report. What do we have? Executive reports, committees, chairperson. The positions book if it's coming back, and the minutes from previous meetings. So this is basically stuff that doesn't need discussion, but it needs council's approval. So it's council's responsibility to go through all the documents that I send out on the Friday, and if you note anything, any inconsistencies, anything you wish to discuss, then during point number 3, which is called approval of the agenda, I will say, is there anything that we need to modify or discuss in the agenda? And you would say, I would like to remove the general coordinator's report from the consent agenda and place it in the substantive agenda. And at that point, council would discuss whatever was the issue with the general coordinator's report. Just like things like spelling mistakes and stuff like that can all be worked out outside of council. It's really just for substantive issues you might have with reports. So that includes committee minutes, executive reports, et cetera, et cetera. Substantive versus informational business. So this isn't a hard and fast rule of setting the agenda, it's just kind of a way to make it more efficient. So on the agenda you'll see things called substantive, so these are items that come with motions, and then informational. So these would be like, for example, the academic and advocacy coordinator brought the results of the undergraduate survey. So that's a really good example of an informational point because it's just stuff that council should be aware of, but there's nothing to vote on. So that is informational. Special council meetings. So special council meetings can be called by 3 representatives or 1 general coordinator. The call out would go to me, to my chair email, and you would say, or to the chair email, and you would say, I would like to request a special council meeting. If you are a councillor, you would say the following councillors, and please CC them so that they know they're calling a meeting. Yes?
Why can special council meetings be called?
Why can they be called?
Yeah, like why?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were genuinely asking me. To discuss business of urgence that can't be dealt with at a regular council meeting. So if something comes up that needs to be discussed and council needs to make a decision urgently, then you would call a special council meeting. Yes, Isaiah?
Is that more so councilors can do that too?
Yeah, councilors and executives. So 3 councilors or 1 general coordinator. So like, for example, if you would like to call a special council meeting, the email would have to come from Chris to me. And then I would say, yes. Yes, Jared.
What happens if an executive wants to call a special council meeting and the general coordinator's just like, no?
They could find 3 counselors to do it, but yeah, was that what you were gonna say? I mean, that's really the only other way. But yeah, yes, sorry, what's your name? Oh, hello?
Hi. If you're absent at a special council meeting, does it count out of your 3 allowed absences?
No, it does not. So another thing, counselors are allowed 3 absences before you are deemed resigned as per bylaw 6 point something.
It's earlier.
Or later, maybe 3.4 something. Anyways, in the bylaws. I was trying to sound smart here. I know them by heart. But yeah, in the bylaws, if you've missed 3 council meetings, you're deemed resigned. So at that point, I would send you an email and say, hi, you've missed 3 council meetings. Like your seat is no longer yours. You can, however, request an excusal from meetings. So if you want to be excused before the meeting, and this is really, really important because I don't want anyone to accidentally impeach themselves without knowing this. If you want to be excused and not have an absence count, just send me an email before the meeting, say I have to miss it for whatever reason, and then I will bring it to council, and council will decide whether or not to excuse you. Yes?
It's 10.1.
10.1, thank you, bylaw 10.1. There we go. Yes, Jared.
Now let's just say I want an excusal. Do I automatically get it?
No, you don't. Council has to vote for it. So council has to decide whether or not you're going to be excused. In the past few years, it's been fairly done fairly friendly manner. Like you don't have to come and present your reason to council. Like usually we just excuse. That being said, obviously don't abuse the ability to be excused from your council meetings. Yes, Isaiah.
It's 3 in gross, not 3 in round.
Yeah, 3 in general. And I'm the one that maintains the spreadsheet of absences. Yes, Emma.
So if council has to vote for your excuse, if the excuse is like something very private, we have to...
You don't need to give a reason. That's the thing, is that you don't need to give a reason. Like, most counselors will usually give you the benefit of the doubt. There are some reasons stipulated in the standing regulations that are an automatic excusal. So for example, you have an exam at the same time as council. Like during finals, sometimes you'll have exams Wednesday night when you didn't have class that time. Council has to excuse you. It's in the standing regs. But if there's like a family matter you need to attend to, you can just email me and say for personal reasons, and then I'll bring it to council. Like there's no need to disclose anything personal. Yes, Victoria.
So coming in the winter semester, I actually have a class on Wednesday nights that finishes I think at 8, and I like talk to my academic advisor or whatever. If I'm late for every council meeting, is that problematic? As it would be the second.
Yeah, it's technically 60 minutes count as an absence.
Okay.
But you just email me and we can figure it out. Yeah, it's okay. And then I'll just bring it to council and say Victoria has a class in the winter. And yeah, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Isaiah?
Do meetings always have to start at 6 a.m.?
It isn't. Yeah, Sophie. I'll let you. Yeah. There we go. You got there, Jared.
So you said 60 minutes. What happens if hypothetically there's like, you know, a really long council and it's like already 12 in the morning? Am I allowed to just leave even if it goes till 1:30 in the morning? Well, God forbid, but let's just say it does. Not like that has ever happened before.
Never.
So council passed a motion at the beginning of last year to have meetings end at 11. So basically that means you can leave at 10 and not have an absence counted. That being said, hopefully we won't have councils go that long, but like if it's 12, technically it's not still part of the council meeting, it's just been extended kind of artificially by motions. So the answer to your question in the very long explanation I just gave is no, you're good. Emma?
So if people start leaving, then you call quorum?
Yes, yeah, and that is, I think, number 8 slide. Let me just get through the types of council meetings. So remember, special council called by 3 councilors or an executive, that only requires 2 business days notice according to the standing regs. So if you want to call a meeting for a Wednesday, you can send me the info on a Monday. However, for the regular council meetings, info goes out on Friday because it's 3 business days. And anytime you see the word day at the beginning of the standing regs, day is defined as a business day. So just remember that, because sometimes it can be confusing because you need to go all the way back to the beginning to remember what day means. Special councils do not affect councilor attendance. So Like if you're at 2 absences and you miss a special, you're still at 2 absences. However, out of respect for myself, the rest of your counselors, please advise me if you can't go to a council meeting, because we need to know if we're not going to hit quorum to just cancel it or not. So just keep that in mind. As well, there are general and special general meetings. Oh, general's not on there. So the AGM is held in April of every year. It has to be held. The agenda is fixed. And then there are also special general meetings, and those are called by councillors,
The non-existent.
general coordinator, or by 250 member petition. I've only seen one special general meeting ever called, and that was for the student strikes in 2012. Yeah, so it is like, folks, y'all had to get signatures for your voting stuff. Remember how much fun that is? Now remember how much fun it is to try and get 250 or 450 of those. Yes, Isaiah.
When it comes to canceled meetings,
Mhm.
what's the procedure? Like, are they just canceled? Or-
Yeah, so SCMs, special council meetings, if, like, usually because we have this council Facebook group, I'll say who can attend the meeting and who can't, and if it looks like there's gonna be 2 people coming, there's no sense in making the other, like, those 2 people show up for no reason, so I'll just send out an email saying the SCM's been canceled due to quorum issues. However, for the regular council meetings, like, it needs to happen in the bylaws, so everybody has to show up, with some very, very, not everybody has to show up, I mean, like, I have to show up, the executive has to show up, or else they get their pay docked. So, like, the meeting will at least attempt to take place. There's no canceling a regular meeting, with one exception that I've ever seen in my many years here. Yes, Sophie? Snow day. Yes, that did happen this year. So that was the first, yes, no, this year, 2019. So the February regular council meeting was the first RCM to be canceled in at least 7 years. So, thank you, Snow. That happened. Yes, Desiree. Sorry?
Oh, was it?
We call it, yeah. Because it basically, like, it has to happen.
Yeah.
So, yes, Selma.
Sorry, can we take like 5 minutes?
Oh,
I
yeah,
don't want to
yeah,
miss
sure.
anything, and I want to.
He's on
Yes.
fasting.
Yeah, so I will be back. But
Yeah, yeah,
I don't want to miss anything.
yeah. Not a problem. So, 5-minute recess. I promise you I'm almost done. Time quorum. If you hear my voice, clap once. If you hear my voice, clap twice. If you hear my voice, clap 3 times.
speak, let us listen to her.
Actually, technically I'm trying to speak, but I didn't. All right, folks, I promise there's not a lot left to this. Though I really, really appreciated the interactiveness. Like, usually when I give this presentation, I think last time I actually saw someone fall asleep. So it's really appreciated, and it's awesome that everyone's getting super into this. Hey, keep the questions coming. So yeah, just a couple quick notes before we end. So quorum, somebody brought it up before. So the definition of quorum is the number of voting members who must be present to validly transact business that is legally binding on the association. So as you are a board of directors, you're legally bound by the decisions that you make. So if 2 people showed up and voted on stuff, that wouldn't be very democratic. So in the case of the CSU's bylaws, quorum is 1/3. Since you are 17, that means, yeah, I think you said it before, it's 6, yeah. I can't do math in front of people. So if 6 people are there, quorum is good, we're good to go. Yes?
You have to round up to the closest numbers or?
Round down, because 1/3 of a person is not a thing.
No, because like you could have gone to 5 or 6, so you threw it so high.
Oh, yeah, sorry, you would round up. Yeah, there we go. So like, if it's 6.33 people, you need 7 people.
Okay.
Yeah.
If it's
Yes,
like 6.01, you go to 7.
Yes, but since it's divided by 3, I don't think that can
Yeah.
ever happen. Jared?
So let's just say hypothetically, exactly 6 people show up, they vote on something, and then next council, everyone shows up. They can just undo that stuff, right?
Yeah, but as the same way, if everyone showed up to one meeting and then everyone showed up to the next meeting, they could also undo the things they did last meeting. So yeah, it happens.
Now, at the same time, if everyone, all 17 show up to a meeting, they vote on something, and it meets 2/3 majority, and it goes with like exactly how it is, but so like 6 say no and everyone else says yes. And then next meeting, 6 people show up, but one of them is one of the people that voted yes initially.
Oh, doesn't matter because it's the next meeting. The only time that the presiding thing where you need to have been on the non-presiding side is relevant is if it happens in the same meeting. If it's the next meeting, anyone can do whatever they want with
So-
50% if there's notice, and with a 2/3 if there's not notice.
So if the 6 people that voted no just show up and they're the only ones that show up, could they just undo what happened by themselves?
Yes, as long as they're a majority, or a
Okay.
2/3 majority in that case.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, they would be a 100% majority in this
Yes.
very specific, very rare case.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
So the main
Yes,
point-
Emma.
Is there a quorum for special meetings?
Yeah, it's, a quorum's always 6. So, well, it's always always 1/3. So, in whatever case, yes.
But in your scenario, that wouldn't happen too many times, because then
Yeah.
people would have eaten up like half
Yeah.
their absences for that.
It would, yeah,
Yeah,
it would also
it'd
be
be
a
like
lot.
insatiably rare, but it is hypothetically possible.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, so I think
Yes.
the main point there is don't pull the Soviet Union in the 1950s and boycott the United Nations Security Council, leading to the Korean War.
Yeah.
I think my main point is show up to council.
Yeah.
Yeah, just try not to pull. Sorry, trust me. It never goes over well with your constituents. Votes taken in the absence of quorum are invalid, obviously. Quorum must be present throughout the meeting to provide ongoing protection for the absentees and the organization. So quorum has to stay, especially during the votes. If somebody calls quorum, then the meeting is over, if quorum is not there. Yes?
Theoretically, could you make motions in the absence of quorum, and then when quorum is achieved, you could ratify those decisions made?
I mean, as long as somebody doesn't call it, you're usually okay. But like, it's not a good thing. It's not a good practice. So yeah, in theory. Also, fun fact, in Robert's rules, you're not supposed to ask me theoretical questions. I'm just joking though. Like, here it's fine. But
Like in the actual rules of
yeah, it says you're not supposed to ask the chair hypothetical questions.
in an official meeting or
Yes, in an official meeting. Like when you ask a point of if you ask a point of information to me and you say point of information, what if something happens? You're not supposed to do that.
But
Fun
if
fact.
we're in the speakers list, does that count?
I would say no. I have to review it, but this is like 800 pages long. I'm not ever going to pretend that I know it by heart. So I will always, like a responsible chair will always go and check stuff before, like if it's something that's really technical and specific, I will never pretend that I know this entire thing by heart. Yes, Jared.
How do we decipher what is hypothetical versus what is more legitimate?
If it starts by in the case that something happened, I guess it would be hypothetical. Sophie?
Or if?
I feel like it depends on the context.
Yes.
Because if you're like, oh, in the last 3 years, this very specific situation has occurred more than once, what would we do if that occurs again related to emotion? Versus if we get a time machine and go back to the Soviet Union, how would this motion affect our decision making? Yeah, no, I wouldn't answer that. Yes, Jared?
So yeah, that's actually exactly what I meant, because it
Yeah.
would be like, it's very different, to say like, hypothetically, if at the end of this mandate, when the 2020-2021 mandate is voted on, what are we going to do if the executives get unfairly disqualified? Because that's never happened before, except it has twice now.
Yeah, I mean,
You
at
know,
this, like,
and we want to have an actual further discussion about it to like try and maybe put more things in place to prevent this.
Oh.
Versus, like, it's only hypothetical if this happens, but based off of.
yeah, council can talk about hypothetical things. I mean, there's just a specific section of Robert's rules that says you can't ask me to decide what
okay.
happens in these hypothetical situations, like
Okay.
the chairperson. John?
Yeah, in those cases, whether you're ruling if that's hypothetical, don't ask me that, or don't.
Yeah.
It's a chair's discretion.
Yeah.
If you really want to know what the chair would say, you can always overrule the chair.
Yeah. Though this is like also something that would never happen. We hope. Okay, so conducting meetings. So at the CSU, we have closed session as well as, well, I guess every board. Sometimes it's called executive or in-camera session in Robert's Rules. So as a board, we should strive to maintain, or you should strive to maintain transparency. However, sometimes there's issues that can arise of a legal nature or a sensitive issue, something with personal information. Things like hiring, CVs, when they're distributed, has to be done in closed session for legal reasons. So council has to make a motion to go into closed session, and under our standing regs, but not under Robert's Rules, it requires a 2/3 majority. So then we just ask anyone who's not myself, the minute keeper, the counselors, the executives, the judicial board, I think that's it, academic caucus? Is that it?
Academic caucus.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, there we go. So that's the people who can stay in the room in a closed session meeting. However, with a 2/3 majority, council can also vote to allow somebody else in. So for example, I think the CSU lawyer was allowed in council, in a closed session. Council just has to say, I move to allow this person, and then vote for it. Yes, Jared?
Does it work the other way around, that a 2/3 majority kicks someone out?
Not really. Okay, so the thing about kicking people out of board members can't kick other board members out of a session. You can ask somebody to leave, and then it's their own volition, but you can't actually like kick a board member out because say you required, like in some weird situation where you required a certain amount of votes to make something pass, like council could actually ask somebody if they could vote people out, they could just vote the dissenting person out. So council can't force anybody to leave, like a director to leave a meeting unless there's like some kind of mitigating circumstances. But yeah, like you can't vote to kick out your fellow councillor is the gist of that. What else? Yeah, so confidentiality has two purposes: to protect the organization, its operations, economic interests, etc., and to protect individual or third party when release of certain information would be an unreasonable invasion of their personal privacy. So, that's good. And my final slide, my favorite, quote about Robert's Rules, that I will read to you now. So know all about parliamentary law, but don't try to show off your knowledge. Never be too technical or more strict than is absolutely necessary for the good of the meeting. Use your judgment, as the Assembly may be of such a nature, through its ignorance of parliamentary usage and peaceable disposition, that a strict enforcement of the rules instead of assisting would greatly hinder business. But in large assemblies where there's much work to be done, and especially where there's liability to trouble, the only safe course is to require a strict observance of the rules. That to say, if you end up, it's more, I guess, a sharing thing, but if you end up in a meeting where 90% of the people in the meeting don't know Robert's Rules, basically just focus on the important stuff and don't nitpick. However, which is generally what happens in, like for example, if we have a lot of community members or members at large that show up, I'm not going to shove Robert's Rules down their throat and make them, like that's a point of information, not a point of order or something like that. However, I'm obviously going to put the focus on things like decorum and respect. As well, when there's more sensitive issues that are discussed in council, at that point, I'll be more observant of Robert's Rules because, like, the chair doesn't want to appear favorable to one side or the other. But basically, the gist of this is, if everyone's happy and getting along, then we can let a few things slide. But when it gets down to business, we need to get down to business. That is all. Any questions? Yes, Elias.
So I was just wondering, to what extent are Robert's Rule binding? So let's say someone misbehaves systematically. What happens? Can we kick him out? What happened? Like.
I just had something I wanted to read to you. Yeah, Sophie, go ahead.
Okay. Under the new code of conduct, there is a procedure for handling those kinds of situations. Basically, you can like file a complaint against the person who is systematically like not following the procedure and their expected conduct in a meeting. You can also like, there's a lot of different things you can do, but there is a procedure that's like, you can file a complaint. If there's a conflict of interest and someone's like in direct conflict of interest, like let's say a totally hypothetical thing, someone is dating someone else and is trying to motion to give that person money directly without like any real reason, and they like live together and they're conjoined, like you could call them out for a conflict of interest and council can vote to like rescind, and then what they can do is if they're like, actually it wasn't a conflict of interest and here's why, they have to appeal to the judicial board, but like you can for the duration of a meeting be like, and then they have to appeal that. There's very specific things, so there's conflict of interest and then repeated behavior, which is like validated with a complaint to, yeah.
There's also some procedures in Robert's Rules to, like if somebody's disturbing the assembly, but that's like, it once again, it's very specific to the circumstance. I think yours was a bit more about like disturbing the CSU as a whole, but they can be the same thing as well. I was actually going to read to you, refraining from disturbing the assembly. So during debate, during remarks by the presiding officer to the assembly, and during voting, no member should be permitted to disturb the assembly by whispering, walking across the floor, or in any other way. The key words here are disturb the assembly. This rule does not mean, therefore, that members can never whisper or walk from one place to the other, etc., as at large meetings it would be impossible to enforce such a rule. However, the presiding officer should watch that such activity does not disturb the meeting or hamper the transaction of business. Basically, if you're disturbing the meeting, I will tell you you're disturbing the meeting. If you're repeatedly disturbing the meeting, I will tell you that you're repeatedly disturbing the meeting. If I have to tell you several times, then I will start with disciplinary procedures in Robert's Rules. But folks, just be respectful. The other thing that I wanted to read to you, refraining from attacking a member's motives. So when you're speaking to each other, and I'll paraphrase this, the member could say, I believe there is strong evidence that the other member is mistaken. The moment the chair hears such words as fraud, liar, or lie used about a member in debate, they must act immediately and decisively to correct the matter and prevent its repetition. So please don't call each other names. That's the basic summary of that. Just a couple of other decorum rules. Sorry, they're not on my presentation. So avoid using other members' names. So in parliamentary procedure, if you're talking about somebody, try to avoid using their name as much as possible. So you can say like my colleague or like the general coordinator or the internal coordinator, as they said. Like I disagree with it for X, Y, Z reasons, but just a lot of it's kind of common sense as well. Just be respectful to each other and please don't throw attacks across the room, because then I will have to correct you, as Robert's Rule says. Thank you all. Oh, look. Sorry. What was it called? Resources. And I will send you the slideshow.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you folks for listening. That was actually really cool. I'm glad everyone participated so actively.
And I have a question.
Yes.
You mentioned about names, but what about pronouns?
Yeah, I'll get to.
Robert Rules.
No. I'll do this like informally next meeting, kind of.
Okay.
Yeah,
Just wasn't sure.
I'll just give you the Cliff Notes summary. Basically, I'm gonna go around the room and do a little introduction. If you wanna say your preferred pronoun, feel free to. If you don't, we'll just address you with gender-neutral pronouns. That way everyone's happy.
Hello everybody, my name is John Hutton. For those of you who don't know me, I am the outgoing finance coordinator of the CSU. So a couple more days left in office and sort of it's a little humble brag here. I'm the first finance coordinator in a surprising number of years who actually finished their mandate. So I'm going to enjoy that fact. Jumping over that lowest of bars. For the final presentation tonight, we're going to be talking about the introduction to fiduciary responsibility, the rights and responsibilities of board of director members of nonprofit organizations. Which rolls off the tongue, I'm sure. So, or as we can call it another title, let's get fiscal. I'm going to be throwing a lot of Simpsons memes to hold your attention by any means necessary. The outline of tonight's presentation will be the following topics. We're talking about, okay, just goes ahead without me. Number one will take up the majority of the presentation time. So talking about the duties of nonprofit board of directors. This is under corporate law. This is legal duties. It's not just good practice. We'll also touch on conflict of interest, what that is, ideas around financial disclosures, really high-level overview of the CSU's financial processes, and then talk a little bit about contracts as well. But most of the presentation will be on number one. So starting off, what is a fiduciary anyway? You've probably heard that word before. Who knows what it actually means? So there's one definition of it. But a lot of people would hear that thing and they think money. It's actually not. Fiduciary is a legal responsibility. It means that you have a legal duty to implement a series of tasks or some duties or responsibilities on behalf of somebody or something else. So in this case, as members of the board of directors of the CSU, you are fiduciaries of the union. So in this case, the CSU is a legal person, is a corporation, nonprofit corporation, and you are the fiduciaries of it. So fiduciary does not mean money, it means legal responsibilities of members of the board of directors or that kind of stuff. What is a nonprofit organization? Well, first of all, we're a corporation, so we're a legal entity recognized by law. Under the law, we are a person. It is an organization, an entity that is independent of the directors, the officers, or the members. So the directors are you. The officers are the executives in this case. There's a difference between members of the board of directors and members of the executives. It's like a CEO versus member of the board as well. These executives are tasked with implementing the decisions of the members of the board of directors. And then the members, of course, are everyone who has voting rights in the organization, which in this case is the students. So, with the corporation, all of its liabilities, debts, and obligations are limited to the corporation itself. If the CSU does really awful things this year and the next year, and makes huge amounts of debt, the debt is on the corporation and not on the individuals who sat on the board of directors. So, don't make terrible financial decisions, but if those do happen, you personally are not legally responsible. You cannot be told you have to repay this debt. It's on the corporation. So the responsibilities, the duties, and the liabilities of directors are written out in corporate law. So those will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but there's a lot of similarities between them, both in Canada and the US, that are all based on usually the British common law system. So there's a lot of overlap there. And nonprofits are non-share corporations. So that means that rather than with like a for-profit corporation, you have people that buy shares, and that gives them a stake in the company. With nonprofits, membership-based. So it's not $1, one vote, or one share, one vote. It's one member, one vote. So that's the big Coles Notes version of what is a nonprofit corporation. What are the roles of directors? Well, you're part of the governing body. You are the highest governing body outside of the general membership and through AGMs and referendums. So you're the highest authority body. You participate in the administration, guidance, supervision of the affairs of an organization. Your job is to give the high-level strategic leadership of the organization. So from different nonprofits to nonprofits, there's different titles for this role. So we use counselor, but it's the same thing as a director kind of stuff. You get a sense of what your job is versus what the executive's job is versus other people's jobs. Think of the idea, your nose should always be in the kitchen, but your fingers shouldn't be in the dough. That's your job as the board of directors. You don't want to micromanage. You want to provide the high-level strategic direction of the organization. If you want to get really involved on committees, that's great. But you're looking at more high-level policy, setting the direction of the organization, rather than trying to monitor staff people's everyday tasks of managing little things. So an example might be, we should order a bunch of vending machines. It shouldn't be, we want to switch this one item in the vending machine. That's not a good use of your time. You could do it. It's not a good use of your time. That's micromanaging. That's kind of what I'm getting at there. So here's some of your legal duties. I'm going to go through each of them in detail, but there's two main ones. And number one breaks down into a lot of subcategories. So your two duties are the duty of care and the duty of loyalty. Go over all of them. The duty of care, of course, breaks down into a bunch of subcategories. But if you fill these two duties, you are doing your job as a counselor, or as a member of the, as a director. If you do not discharge your duties properly, you can be found legally liable. So if decisions are made that prove that you violate some of these duties, board insurance will not necessarily cover you. So do make sure that you uphold all your duties. So what are those? First, we have the duty of care. And so what the duty of care is its level of attention required of a director. It's sort of like your duty to be informed. Don't do stupid things. Make sure you're really paying attention, staying on the ball. Don't do things like what Jared was talking about earlier, where you're not paying attention to how things are voting on $10,000 motions. Do your due diligence. So making sure that high standards are being upheld. So here where it says take care of the nonprofit by ensuring prudent use of all assets. Prudent is also a legal term. A similar legal term would be reasonable or reasonably prudent person. So it doesn't necessarily mean to be the best possible option in a circumstance, but when people are looking at what is a prudent or reasonable course of action, it's like somebody who is in their right mind and moderately competent, and, an average person could theoretically do that thing in that situation. So you're saying a reasonably prudent person doing your due diligence. It's not requiring that you necessarily be perfect, but that you are doing the best you can in the circumstance, in the interest of the organization. You should generally be informed about an issue before making a business decision relating to it. So you should be reading your council documents. You'll get them every week. There'll be a combination of items in the main agenda, plus there'll be a consent agenda. Note of that. Often the consent agenda includes things like committee minutes. So instead of having discussion points and whether we should ratify the Finance Committee, the Sustainability Committee minutes, they'll just say, put in the consent agenda, and ratify the agenda, it's considered all passed. There's often a lot of motions in these committee reports. They could approve policy, they could approve financial decisions, and when you approve the consent agenda, those motions get ratified on behalf of council. So make sure you read those, because that is part of your job. The duty of competence, what is that? Well, you are required to have a certain amount of skill and information doing the job. So part of it, you get council orientation. You learn about what your job actually is. That's one example. You don't have to be the ultimate expert, but again, you're supposed to be holding yourself to a certain standard of care here. So as long as you're trying to learn about the issues, you're reading the documents, you're making an effort, you are staying up to date on things, that's doing your job well. You can incur liability where your conduct falls short of that prescribed standard of care. As I said earlier, some of this repeats. So what is a standard of care? There's actually two types. One is objective and one is subjective. So an objective standard of care is when everybody's held to the same standard. And a subjective is when the skills and competences and traits that people have are factored into whether they're fulfilling the duty of care or not. So great examples might be if you are a lawyer or a certified accountant and you see things in a motion or a document or a practice or something. Because of your training, you notice them, but someone who's like an undergrad art student might not necessarily catch that. You will be held to a higher standard than the undergrad art student because you have that training. And so in Quebec, we use the subjective standard. So if there's any accountants or members of the Quebec Bar or people with high levels of professional training, you're expected to use that knowledge in the interest of the organization. You can't just say, well, we're all just a bunch of undergrads here. You can't hold me to a different standard. We absolutely can. Next up. So here's what you should be doing. You should be having a general knowledge of the organization. So that means standing regulations, the bylaws, the policies, that type of stuff. As well as like getting a sense of the practices in the office and stuff like that. And informing yourself again with the governance model and the structure of the organization. We had some presentations tonight. If you want to learn more, that's what we're here for. You can always answer your questions. We're happy to have those conversations. One thing I did during my own term as finance coordinator, I would invite people, if you want to learn a lot about the budget, book a meeting with me. I'll walk you through it line by line with some folks that came in. It's great. Other executives can do the same thing. Talk about the sustainability organizations on campus and the committees they're on. What is orientation week and all the details around that. If you want to learn more about that, the executives are there for you and they're happy to have those conversations. Duty of competence continued. Mere errors of judgment isn't the same thing as breaching your duty of competence. So if you make a decision that turned out to have not been a great one, that's not the same thing as gross negligence. You're allowed to be wrong about things. You don't need to have like super continuous attention to what's going on in the organization. It's one thing to make sure that you're reading your regular council packages, paying attention to that kind of stuff. You don't need to know what's happening every day with every executive and staff person in the office. If you want to be doing that much effort to learn that, that's great. But if you don't manage to go to that high level of informing yourself, that's okay. Your responsibilities are limited to the duties of council. So this has been, So at council, that is the time when you exercise your authority. And your authority is as council versus as councilors. So although you're the highest authority in the union, and you do have power to hire and fire anybody, the staff person or executive or whatever, that doesn't mean that you as an individual during any work day can just walk into the CSU office, tell the receptionist you're fired, or you need to do this for me, jump. I'm going to reschedule you till next week. That's not how it works. Council's authority is collective and during duly called council meetings or committee meetings. Outside of that, you don't have jurisdiction. So that's something that actually got a councillor in trouble during the last year, so do take note of that lesson there. You don't need to attend every single board meeting to be considered to have discharged your fiduciary duties, but do try to make it to most of them, because that is part of trying to keep up with things, keeping informed. But if you miss a board meeting from time to time, that's not a breach of the law. You're allowed to take certain matters of business and entrust it to the officers. So again, that's the executive, or could be telling the executives they can then delegate that again to staff. Those are things that you're allowed to do as directors. So you just say, like, we want to put out a statement on this issue as council, but we need a little bit of time to work on it, so we'll say the executive will draft the statement and they can come back to us. That's an example of you entrusting matters of business to an officer of the organization. Or it could be like, I want this executive to get some quotes on this thing you want to do. Yeah.
On the point, directors need not attend all board meetings to discharge their fiduciary obligations. What's the difference between that and not attending a normal board meeting? I'm not really getting it.
So, under the CSU's own policies, you're supposed to attend meetings. And if you miss too many without excuse, you can be removed from office. So that's within the CSU's own bylaws. But if you go up a step above and go into provincial and federal corporate law, which is what we're doing here, the idea is that if you miss a meeting from time to time, you're not in breach of your legal duties. So, yes, try to keep up. Do try to be informed, but if you miss one meeting, you're not breaching your fiduciary duty. It's not going to be the end of the world, especially if you make a point of reading the meeting minutes. That way you can miss the meeting and still be keeping up with the organization's business. Did that answer your question?
Yep.
Sorry.
Yeah.
These board meetings are basically like committee meetings.
This is a board meeting. So council is the board, directors are the councilors. And so committees of the board would be council committees. So this is using the legalistic terms, but you can set up those with something else in this case. So officers are executives, directors are councilors. So in this case, this last point here, unless you have really clear reasons to not trust an officer or a staff person or something like that, you're able to say, I'm fulfilling my duty of competence by saying, okay, I believe that this officer will do the duties that were assigned to them. So if an executive does do something really sketchy, steals money or makes a conflict of interest or something like that, but you had no idea that would be coming. I seem really nice and unassuming. I gave a nice presentation. Okay, he's probably got it. No red flags there. And then next week I go steal some money on the way out the door. You would not be considered in breach of your duties because of my mistakes. If I was doing really sketchy things and you saw that and didn't do anything, that would be a breach. But if you had no reason to suspect that I'm up to no good, and you just let it go, you can't be held liable for that. You're safe. So that's what that means, that you're justified in trusting the officers, unless you have a reason not to. And just as a general practice, it's probably a good idea. Everyone's here trying to do their best, trying to do something good. So being super suspicious of everyone all the time is just not good for the organization. Next up, we have the duty to act honestly. So what this means is you should be dealing honestly and not for an improper purpose. What does that mean? Among other things, this is a great example of what often comes up in especially student union councils. If you don't have the time to do your job, you should be upfront about it. It's way better to be a reliable no than an unreliable yes. If you're going to sign up for 4 committees, you better make sure that you can attend those 4 committees regularly and read the documents and participate. If you can't do that, be honest about it. It's better to just give someone else the space to do that. Every year there's 1 or 2 councillors, sometimes more, that just get elected, come to a few meetings, decide it's not for them, and they just don't come to a lot of meetings, but they don't resign either. That's not good practice. You should be upfront about whether you can attend or not, among other things. If you have conflict of interest or perceived conflict of interest, you should be declaring them. be a number of different things, so like financial or HR-related decisions about people that you might be related to, might be dating, might be really close friends with. Those are some examples of conflicts of interest. If you are the executive of a club, voting on a motion that affects that club, that's a conflict of interest. Perceived conflicts of interest are not technically conflicts of interest, but people see that as kind of close. So like, maybe you were a member of a club last year, and you're voting on issues affecting that club. As a completely new executive, technically you don't have a conflict of interest, but people might see that you're biased towards that club. That's a perceived conflict of interest, potentially. That's, what is a perceived versus a real conflict of interest? Can sometimes be a gray zone, sometimes it's about optics, sometimes it's even a political type of thing, so discretion is advised. You might be able to argue that it's not a conflict of interest, but do try to stay on the safe side. There's even a couple people that say that's probably sketchy. Even if most people agree, I would probably step back. It's always better to be on the safe side. For no other reason, being transparent and honest with an organization that represents students, that's just good practice. Next up, we have the duty of diligence. So that means you're diligent in attending to your duties. So again, some of these duties overlap. So I've said this before, keeping up with the documents and reading standing regulations and attending your meetings, knowing what's happening. You need to keep showing up. If you are consistently not attending council or committee meetings, let someone else take your spot. Where specialized advice is needed, get it. If this is a difficult HR decision or you need to talk to a lawyer, talk to a lawyer. Mandate the executive to call the lawyer the next morning or something like that. If you need specialized information, you are legally required to be seeking those services. Don't fuck it up, basically. You should always exercise your best judgment in voting on decisions and not simply vote with the majority for no well-informed reasons. People I like voted that way is not a good reason to vote a certain way. Simple as that. So think about what you actually think about the thing that's being voted on, which consists of the text of the motion you're voting on, and vote accordingly. Don't just vote based on the herd. Good minutes of the organization need to be kept. People need to know what decisions were made, what major discussions were had. If certain people dissented on important issues, that needs to be recorded as well. So this is, that one less falls on you as the minute keeper, but making sure that the CSU does keep up with getting you your minutes is important. It's part of the duty of diligence. So in some boards of directors, someone is assigned the role of the secretary or the minute keeper. In this case, we have someone who's not a councillor do it. But if you're not getting regular minutes, you should raise that as a point because you need that. So, the duty to exercise power. That's a fun sounding one, isn't it? Ultimately, you are the final stop in the organization. You are the highest level outside of the regular student elections or general assemblies that have full quorum to vote. You're the highest level. So you're ultimately responsible for the decisions of the organization. As a collective, not just the ones who voted for the thing. You as a collective are responsible for the decisions made by the organization. And if you're being inactive and inattentive and decisions are made that could put the organization at risk, that can be a breach of your duty. In that sense, you're responsible for furthering the corporation's goals and objectives. So what those goals are will be set by you folks, as well as folks that come from years before. So you have the policy manuals, the positions book, stuff like that, the referendums that students vote in. Those set the direction, but also you add on to what's been done before. And those are the goals of the corporation. It's also things like the letters patent, like our goal is to advocacy, community building, events, and services. And so your job is to make sure that those are implemented. And once the union decides to enact a position or a motion or initiative or a service, even if you didn't vote for it, making sure that it's carried through as successfully as possible is your duty. I'll get into that with the duty of loyalty shortly, but making sure that the mandates given by council or by students or whatever, you have to make sure that those things get done. So there's 3 referendums on positions passed in the last set of elections. Health insurance, food autonomy campaign, and whatever the environmentalism, Green New Deal type stuff. If those referendum mandates aren't being upheld, that's not furthering the goals and objectives of the corporations. You have a duty to make sure that referendum mandates are upheld, among other things. That's just an easy example. It sounds obvious, but you gotta make decisions. You can't all abstain on everything. You do have to pick what side of the fence you're on. And you should be delivering standards for measuring the performance of senior management and carrying out annual performance reviews. So we do that in 2 forms currently. There's the executives get up to 10% of the salary bonus that is awarded by council at council's discretion. There's a discussion in the last council meeting of every year. So that's one way to discuss whether the executives did well or not. But that's a decision to award extra salary. Theoretically, if you wanted to at any point, council could decide we want to talk about this executive's performance, and deciding that they're not meeting the standards, they could impose discipline if they wanted to. So you got to make sure that executives are being reviewed. One thing we added to the finance policy just recently was that at the very last finance committee meeting of the year, executive salaries would be reviewed. The idea there was that councillors would be deciding what is fair compensation for executives, but it'd be done at the last council meeting of the finance committee meeting of the year, so that it wouldn't be executives voting on their own salary, but the next mandate's team, so removing some of the conflict of interest there. But if you want to add more elements of performance reviews for senior management, that's at your discretion. So, duty of obedience means we will obey the laws and regulations of the organization. Simple as that. The bylaws, the policies, make sure that those are applied. If you're not going to apply them, no one else is. If you don't apply the policies, why do we pass them in the first place? Again, follow the bylaws. For the CSU, that means bylaws, standing regulations, positions book, ethics and sustainability policy, referendum mandates, stuff like that. The nonprofit adheres to the stated corporate purposes and mission. And any decision made by the board means that the board has spoken on behalf of the organization. It's not just that faction of the council that made the decision. The CSU made the decision. Everybody owns it equally. And every director is responsible. Okay, next slide, please. So, with that in mind, where a decision is made and every director has a responsibility to make sure that the decision made is done well, and is communicated well. So it's your job to promote the CSU to students and get them interested. What happens if a decision is made that I didn't like? Because I have the legal duty of obedience to the organization. We're all here trying to make the CSU as successful as possible. What if I disagree with the decision? Well, step 1, do not be silent about it. Make sure that during the meeting, you speak up and have your dissent recorded. So what you can do is, when votes are taking place, you can say, I want my dissent noted. And in the minutes they'll note, John Hutton voted no, or John Hutton abstained, or whatever. You can do that. If you're not present at a meeting, what you can do is get the minutes from the meeting and send an email to the chair or a message or whatever, and let them know that they want your dissent passed on to the board, so that it won't necessarily bring it back as an item in council or a discussion, but just you can send the message on to the board of directors that I don't agree with the decision that was made. So that's an option you have. In certain circumstances, if the dissent is recorded properly, you can protect it from liabilities. This isn't so much a thing that really applies at the CSU or other student unions. This is something that comes up more often at different types of nonprofit organizations, but if there's certain financial decisions or HR decisions that are made that might be inappropriate or for whatever reason, if you see something sketchy happening, if you see like a conflict of interest clearly happening in the room, and the majority is voting in favor of it anyway, and you dissent, and then there's like lawsuits against the board for violating their conflict of interest requirements, you can be protected, unlike other councillors maybe, because you record your dissent. Extreme example, but that's how that would apply. But basically, if you disagree with the decision, do speak up, have your dissent noted, but ultimately, you are all the CSU collectively, and you are all responsible for the decisions made by the CSU. So you should be trying to make sure that put the best image forward for the CSU. Next, we have the duty of loyalty. And act honestly in the interest of the organization. Can't give it up to somebody else. Basically, the gist of this is that you can't use your role on a board of directors to personally profit. So, we often see in some case laws, and this also applies to corporations. It's like, I'll give you an example there, where say you work at a bank or something that involves a lot of clients, and you have to build a network, a Rolodex of contacts. And you leave that business and you move on to a different business, get hired there. If you take your contact lists and take it to the new business and start calling them and steal the clients of the company you worked for 2 weeks ago, that's a breach of your duty of loyalty. That's an example of that. You can't be using your access to CSU mailing lists or networks or what have you not for personal profit. You can't be running for CSU council or executive just to give more money to your own club or organizations in which you're a member of the board of directors of. Or in the interest of the organization, not yourself. So you're in situations where your duties for the CSU and other interests conflict, and you should be avoiding that. Talk about what that means. So, fulfilling the duty of loyalty seems easy enough. Act in the best interest of the organization, not your own interest, and avoid situations where you have competing fiduciary duties. If you're an executive of a club, you want to make sure the club gets as much money as possible to put on events. And if you're on the CSU, you want to make sure that finance is distributed in a fair way that promotes all forms of student engagement. As a competing fiduciary duty, the interest of the CSU, the interest of the club, competing. Avoid that. But it's not always simple. So let's talk about what that is. Conflicts occur when, again, the organization's best interest conflicts with your own self-interest, or your duties owed to another organization. So fiduciary duty on 2 organizations and can't do both at the same time. There's all sorts of examples of these competencies. So giving a job or contract to a friend, giving a contract to a friend without full process and diligence, not disclosing potential conflicts of interest. If you have a conflict of interest, here's your options. 1, you can, depending on what the conflict is, you could immediately declare the conflict and then just abstain from voting. You could and should review the organization's conflict of interest policy. So that's in the code of conduct that should have been discussed earlier and circulated. That's where you find the CSU's policy on it. If you know a thing is coming up in advance, you can reach out to the chair to talk about it. Should I be stepping out of the room for this? Should I just be not speaking? Should I just be abstaining but speaking? You can try to work out what the proper lines are in advance. If you don't know if you're in conflict, you can ask. If the conflict is so severe or so persistent that you really don't think that you can actually fulfill the best interests of the CSU, you should resign. Or resign from the other position. But it's going to be it's not just this one vote and this one meeting at one time. But it's going to be something that comes up so regularly that you're really in a compromised position. Pick one or the other. And where possible, avoid potential conflict, or where the conflict is already materialized. Again, resign as a director. Let's talk about disclosures. So, being fully transparent and strictly following the rules and regulations of the organization is a part of the fiduciary responsibilities of an executive and counselor. Here's some examples of what that is. We need to make sure the auditors we have every year are competent. So we hire auditors usually in a 3-term mandate, and now we have Deloitte that does our audits. Process of selecting the auditing firm. Strict adherence to the budget and financial approvals. So, first council meeting in June, you're supposed to be operating budget presented to you to vote on and approve. If that's not done, and that budget wasn't sent to Finance Committee before then, there's a problem. Providing complete and reliable financial statements. So for the longest time, the only requirement was to post the audited financial statements online. Now we're required to post the audited statements and the budget online. Make sure that gets done. Every single council meeting each month, you're supposed to be provided with the actuals of the budget, so you can always follow along with things. Declare any potential abnormalities. It's a very broad term, so just if you think it's an abnormality, declare it. We're almost done. We're really close, okay? Thank you for bearing with me. The CSU's financial process at a high level. So this is like a really Coles Notes version. All spending must correspond to a budget line that is approved by council. So something really, a really long document presenting every single line in the CSU budgets. It's not a budget, it's several budgets. So you have different fee levies there. Those levies can only be spent on those things. So money collected for HOJO can't be used in orientation week. Money collected for advocacy can't be used for campaigns. There's restricted funds there. But within the different levies, we can break those down different things. So operations has things like staff salaries, it has orientation weeks, sustainability initiatives, academic initiatives, all sorts of different things, and we assign budget lines to those. And make a budget for them, the council approves it. If spending's happening, it's not being recorded in those budget codes, that's really inappropriate. So you're supposed to know what's being spent and when, and that is in accordance with the direction, the mandate that you have approved. All spending of $10,000 and over and asset purchases of $1,000 and over must be first approved by the Finance Committee. Yes?
Just by curiosity, let's say for instance, HOJO accumulates an outstanding surplus. Is it mandated to still be used by HOJO, or could it be then transferred?
Yes. So, HOJO and the LIC have accumulated surpluses from the last couple of years. So we don't record those on the budget as a carry forward, so it's not listed as a revenue the next year. We do record in our own accounting, and it is put as a tab in the budget document, and we'll get the multi-year results of the service centers and the operations budget listings. So there is a surplus reserve that's built up. Those groups could theoretically run a deficit that year, and that's totally okay because they have the financial cushion to deal with it. But the HOJO surplus can only be used on HOJO. There is one exception. Operations is not a restricted account. So operations can be used at HOJO. HOJO can't be used in operations. So spending over $10,000. An asset purchase, that means like anything that's like capital or physical objects, like furniture, computer equipment, stuff like that. That's like asset purchases. I can't just do like an IKEA run of $1,000 and really get myself the nicest stuff for my office without having the Finance Committee approve that first. Purchases of $50,000 or more have to come to council as a specific agenda item. You can't just slide that through the consent agenda when FinCom approved it. It's got to come get explicit approval here. And then any expenditures that happens through what's called the SILC Fund, Student Space Accessible Education and Legal Contingency Fund, can only be used under specific conditions. These are set out in the bylaws, Bylaw J. And any spending happening from the SILC Fund requires a 2/3 majority vote of council, not just a simple majority. This should be two separate bullet points there, but when people are applying to the CSU for reimbursement for things, you file a check requisition form, and depending on what the budget code being assigned to it is, there's different discretionary authorities. So if it's an expenditure involving campaigns or the speaker series line, that requires the signature of the external mobilizations coordinator. The finance policy will tell you who the designated approval authorities are. Where there's no one explicitly designated, it's the finance coordinator alone. But just to know that, so like if a campaign expense comes along and I sign it as the finance coordinator and I'm the only one there, and it comes back, somebody gets out somewhere, council's not happy about that, I could get in trouble for doing that, and you could hold me accountable for that. Because it Taylor didn't have a mandate to, or permission to be approving that expenditure. Basically, that's the financial process, except one thing was added to since I made this presentation back in January, which is that now there's a budget revision process. So at the mid-mandate point, probably January, the finance coordinator is required to make line-by-line review of the budget again and do the whole process again. So they was to improve some financial planning, get a sense of where we are mid-mandate point, revise priorities, redirect resources if we need to. So that's just a new step in the process. Here's our last topic, which is contracts. And this is an important one to think about because CSU often approves contracts, sometimes they're for large amounts of money, and sometimes over a period of multiple years. And as across these forums, they're saying, hey, they are binding. These are legally binding documents. If you don't like it, that's too bad. And the CSU is in some contracts that are poorly written and are not in, maybe for good initiative, but it's not on favorable conditions to us. So making sure that these things are reviewed well and serious attention is given towards negotiations, really important. Sometimes big things like the CSU health and dental plan that affects all students' access to health care. Sometimes smaller things like contracting the farmers markets to do like a vegetable stall once a week. From big to small, the collective agreement is the one we have with the union that represents CSU staff. That sets out salaries, how to hire workers. Those are really important contracts. So, yes, thoroughness and diligence should be applied, and they are binding legal documents. So here's what a good contract has. Well-defined requirements, well-defined objectives, timelines. If the contract is not being upheld, there's some penalty clauses in it. What exactly is supposed to be delivered should be listed, how much it's going to cost, how to exit the contract if you have to. Those are the things to be looking for. So you can take that bullet point list there, and if you see contracts appearing in your council documents, look for those things. If you're not there, you should suggest amendments. That is all I have for you. Thank you for bearing with me on the fiduciary responsibility. I know it's a bit of a dry topic, but it's really important because you are the board of directors of a $2.6 million organization that also has access to a $10 million investment fund. Yes, it's the CSU Council, but you have a lot of responsibility, and I hope that these things are kept in mind as you exercise your duties with level of professionalism. So thank you. Are there any questions? Thoughts?
So in terms of when it comes to council, next week will be approving the budget.
Not next week, no.
The week after.
The first, so your council elect is coming up next week. You're not councillors yet. You're not board of director members yet. Your mandate starts on June 1st. Until then, you're training to become councillors. Council elect meeting is just sort of like a pre-meeting. It's sort of like practicing Robert's rules, practicing making decisions. They also make decisions about who's going to sit on what committees. That's basically the gist of the council elect meeting. You also appoint a chair and a minute keeper for the year. Your first actual meeting will be in June, and that's when, among other things, you'll approve the budget. But you'll have all have had committee meetings before that first meeting, especially finance committee. Any other thoughts, questions? Don't be shy.
Just want to say thank you again, because it's just so appreciated. Like the PowerPoint, everything organized, just love it. Thank you for finishing your mandate, and to the next one, you got this, girl.
Thank you.
Just fine.
I'm gonna kill it next year.
I'm excited. I'll try to be the second finance coordinator to finish my mandate.
Try. You're not gonna try, I'll let you accountable to finish.
That's a great policy.
That's the only election promise I will ended the curse.
Funny that I actually got to meet the last finance coordinator to actually finish their term. I met him recently, and he told me that he actually wrote a pentagram and put up in the window to specifically curse the office.
You still have 10 days, by the way.
Yeah.
You can
so resign.
Give me something to resign and protest over, I dare you.
small out of $1 million.
Alright, I motion to.
I second. And it's adjourned.
Well, there's no.
Beautiful.
We don't have a chair.
Okay, I'll chair.
No.
Like St. Sophie's did, there's combined.
Interim chair.
Yeah.
For today.
Alright, well, thank you so much, guys. This is great.
Thank you.
John, can we leave our waivers with you?
Yes, please do that.
Possibly,
Is that
yeah.
the only one you have?
Beautiful, thank you.
So, Chair is gonna witness?
Sorry?
Chair is gonna witness?
Yeah, Chairwoman is also.